Beneath the shimmering lights of a Miami evening, a single moment threatened to unravel everything. A mysterious photograph, a whispered betrayal, and a man the world called the Dubai Maharaja, standing on the edge of losing the only thing that had ever made him feel truly seen. When Vivian stepped onto his terrace that night, she had no idea she was walking into a storm of secrets, ambition, and a love powerful enough to defy public scandal and private fear. Their fates collided in one breathless instant, and nothing would ever be the same. If you love emotional, dramatic romances filled with twists and heart-stirring moments, don't forget to subscribe and help this channel reach our first 1,000 subscribers. Your support helps these stories grow. Miami greeted Vivian Reed the way it greeted everyone who arrived with something to prove and something to hide. With light so bright it felt like an accusation. The air tasted of salt and expensive perfume drifting from open car windows. Palm trees arched like they had been trained to look effortless. Even the sky seemed curated, a clean blue that made her feel out of place in her plain navy dress and sensible shoes, hair pulled into a low ponytail that said work, not vacation. She tightened her fingers around the handle of her suitcase as the rideshare rolled to a stop in front of her new apartment building. It was small, clean and temporary, just like she wanted. Temporary meant safe. Temporary meant she couldn't ruin her own life again by hoping too loudly. "Welcome," the driver said, cheerful. "You're gonna love it here." Vivian forced a smile. "Thank you." When the car pulled away, the quiet hit her. Not true quiet. Not in Miami, but a pause between sounds. A moment where her heart could decide what rhythm it wanted. She exhaled slowly, the way she had learned to do when fear tried to dress itself up as excitement. Her phone buzzed in her hand before she could unlock her door. An email from Azure Palms Hospitality. Subject, confirmed client, high security, arrive early. Vivian's thumb hovered, her gaze sharpened. She had been hired 3 days ago, interviewed through a screen by a woman with a perfect blowout and a voice that sounded like polished marble. The job title was Luxury Event Coordinator, and the salary was more than Vivian had made in any single year of her life. The kind of money that didn't come without strings. She told herself she would take the money and keep her heart out of it. She told herself she was too old to believe in miracles and too smart to believe in men. The email opened. Client, Robert Sinclair. Vivian stared at the name until the letters stopped looking like letters and started looking like a doorway. Robert Sinclair, the billionaire, the one they called the Dubai Maharaja. Not because it was true, not because he owned a throne or carried royal blood, but because tabloids loved a nickname they could sell. The American who spent his winters in Dubai and his summers on yachts. The man whose face showed up in the same breath as luxury watches, private jets, and charity galas. The man who smiled like nothing could touch him. Vivian's stomach tightened. She had seen him once in a magazine at a dentist's office, all crisp suit and icy composure, standing beside a woman in diamonds. The article had called him untouchable. And now her paycheck, her fresh start, her entire fragile plan depended on being near him. She swallowed. "Okay," she whispered to herself. "It's a job." She unpacked quickly, showered, dressed again with careful precision. Neutral blouse, tailored trousers, comfortable shoes with a low heel. A crossbody bag that looked professional and kept her hands free. She pinned her hair smooth, no jewelry except a delicate chain at her throat. Not because she needed to impress him, because she needed armor. Azure Palms' office sat in a glossy building with glass walls that reflected the sun until it hurt to look. The lobby smelled like citrus and money. Vivian checked in, got her badge, and was led to a conference room where a woman in cream-colored silk stood with a tablet in hand and impatience in her eyes. "Vivian Reed," the woman said without smiling. "I'm Celeste Morgan, Senior PR and Client Relations." Vivian extended a hand. "Nice to meet you." Celeste's handshake was brief, cool. "This is a highly sensitive account. You will follow protocol. If you can't, say so now. Vivian's spine stiffened. I follow protocol. As long as protocol doesn't mean I become invisible. Celeste blinked, as if she wasn't used to pushback. Excuse me? Vivian kept her voice calm. I'm here to do my job. Doing my job requires communication, clarity, and access. If someone's expectation is that I take blame without authority, it's better we address that now. Silence stretched. Celeste's gaze narrowed. Then she gave a small nod like she was granting permission for Vivian to exist. Good, Celeste said. You'll need that backbone. She tapped her tablet and a file appeared on the screen mounted to the wall. Photos of a private beachfront property, a villa with wide terraces and pale stone, a stretch of sand lit by lanterns, the ocean behind it like a promise. Mr. Sinclair is hosting a private celebration at his Miami residence, Celeste said. Limited guest list, high profile, strict privacy, no mistakes, no surprises. Understood. Vivian studied the images, professional instincts already calculating, lighting, weather contingencies, staff movement, entry points. The layout of a party was a story you told with space. Understood, she said. Celeste's lips tightened. There will be NDAs, staff will be vetted, security is intense. Intense is fine, Vivian replied. Chaotic isn't. Celeste's gaze flicked up, almost amused. You and Mr. Sinclair might clash. Why? Vivian asked, careful not to sound curious for the wrong reasons. Celeste hesitated, then said, because he doesn't like being told no, and you look like someone who says no for breakfast. Vivian almost smiled. Almost. Celeste pushed a folder toward her. Vehicle will take you to the property for your initial site walkthrough. You will meet Mr. Sinclair today. Vivian's heartbeat changed, just slightly. Today. Celeste nodded. Do not stare. Do not flirt. Do not give the press anything they can use. Vivian met her eyes. I'm not here for him. I'm here for the work. Celeste's expression softened into something like a warning. That's what they all say. The vehicle that took her to the property was black, silent, and smelled like leather. The driver didn't speak. The city shifted outside the tinted windows from glass towers to lush neighborhoods with iron gates and bougainvillea spilling over walls like secrets. As they approached the coastline, Vivian felt her throat tighten. The ocean appeared suddenly bright and endless. It made her think of all the things she had tried to leave behind. It made her think of beginnings, which were always more frightening than endings. The gates to the property opened with smooth efficiency. A security guard checked the vehicle, then waved them through. Another guard stood near the driveway, earpiece in, sunglasses on, posture like a wall. Vivian stepped out and was hit by the heat, the salt, the faint sound of waves. A man in a dark suit approached. Broad-shouldered, controlled, face calm. Ms. Reed, he said. Carter Wainwright. Vivian offered her hand. Head of security. He didn't look surprised. Yes, this way. They walked along a stone path lined with tropical plants, so perfect they looked staged. Vivian's eyes took in everything automatically. Cameras, sight lines, entrance points, security positioning. Areas where staff could move unseen. Carter led her to the main terrace. The ocean stretched behind it, glittering. The terrace was empty except for one man standing near the railing, looking out at the water as if he was trying to remember what it felt like to breathe. He turned when he heard their footsteps. Vivian's mind, annoyingly, went blank for 1/2 second. Robert Sinclair was taller than he looked in photos. Not in an exaggerated way, but in the grounded way of a man who occupied space without apologizing. He wore a pale linen shirt, open at the collar, sleeves rolled to his forearms, tailored trousers, no visible jewelry except a watch that could have paid Vivian's rent for a year. His hair was dark, styled casually but intentionally. His eyes were a cold shade of blue that became unsettling only because they were paying attention, not the distracted attention of someone rich. The focused attention of someone assessing risk. He stepped forward. His expression was neutral, but his gaze landed on Vivian's face as if he wanted to memorize it. "Vivian Reed," he said. The sound of her name in his voice sent something strange through her, like a quiet vibration under her ribs. "Yes," she answered, steady. "Mr. Sinclair." "Robert," he corrected, simple. "We'll be working closely. Formalities waste time." Vivian kept her expression professional. "Then we should start." Something flickered at the corner of his mouth. Not a smile, something sharper and softer at once. "I like that," he said. "Most people come here and forget how to speak." Vivian's cheeks warmed despite herself. "I don't forget." He studied her for one long second. "No, you don't." Carter cleared his throat, as if reminding them both the world existed. "I'll coordinate with your team regarding access points and vendor entry." Robert nodded without looking away from Vivian. "Good." Carter walked off. Vivian turned toward the terrace layout to regain control of her own pulse. "I'll need a full schedule, a guest count, vendor list, and any restrictions that might affect setup." Robert leaned against the railing, arms relaxed, but his attention sharp. "You'll have it." "I'll also need to know if there's press risk," Vivian added, "because if there is, the perimeter and flow will need to be adjusted. I won't have staff blindsided." Robert's gaze darkened slightly. "There's always press risk." Vivian's voice stayed calm. "Then there's always planning." He looked at her like she'd said something personal. "All planning," he repeated quietly. "That's what you do. It's what I'm paid to do." "That's not why I asked for you," Robert said. The sentence fell between them like a dropped glass. Vivian's breath caught. She forced herself not to show it. "You asked for me?" Robert didn't answer immediately. Instead, he glanced toward the house where a woman in sleek black attire stood near a set of doors, watching them. Robert's jaw tightened, a subtle shift that made him look more human. "Celeste sent you," he said, correcting himself. "But yes, I approved you." Vivian's mind raced, approved, as if she were an object. She raised her chin. "Why?" Robert's gaze returned to hers. "Because you don't look like someone who can be bought." Vivian felt the sting of that in the strangest way. Not insult. Recognition, like he'd seen the invisible line she drew around her soul and respected it. She steadied her voice. "I can be paid. I'm not for sale." Robert's eyes held hers a beat longer than necessary. "Exactly." Vivian looked away first, furious with her own reaction. She opened her notebook. "All right, walk me through the property. I need to know where you want the main gathering space, where guests enter, where staff stations can be hidden without disrupting flow." Robert straightened. "Follow me." They moved through the space together. Vivian asked questions. Robert answered with surprising precision, pointing out where he wanted things to feel intimate, where he wanted things to feel untouchable. He spoke of lighting like someone who understood the power of shadows. He spoke of privacy like someone who had paid for it in ways money couldn't fix. As they walked, Vivian became aware of how close he stood when he spoke. Not invasive, just present. Close enough that she could catch a faint scent of clean citrus and something darker underneath, like cedar or smoke. She hated that her senses noticed. She hated that her pulse responded. At one point, they stopped near a side entrance where staff would pass through. Vivian pointed at a narrow corridor. "This needs to be widened," she said, "or at least organized. If guests are nearby, staff movement will look chaotic." Robert's gaze moved over the space. "It can't be widened." "Then it needs a system," Vivian replied, "and a sign-off from security." Robert tilted his head. "You're not asking permission." Vivian glanced at him. "I'm telling you what's required if you want this to look effortless." A pause. Then Robert's expression softened. "I do." Vivian swallowed. "Then trust me." Robert's eyes dropped for half a second to her mouth as if he wasn't used to wanting something he shouldn't. Then he looked back up, controlled again. "I can do trust," he said. "But I need silence too." Vivian's stomach tightened. "Silence about what?" Robert's face went unreadable. "There will be an announcement at the celebration." Vivian kept her pen poised. "What kind of announcement?" His gaze held hers, steady, guarded. The ocean wind stirred Vivian's hair, and she felt absurdly like the air itself was holding its breath. "Something personal," Robert said. "Something that will draw attention." Vivian's instincts flared. "If it draws attention, it affects operations. I need to plan for it." Robert took one step closer, not threatening, not aggressive, but close enough that Vivian had to fight the urge to step back. When he spoke, his voice was low, meant only for her. "Miss Reed," he said, and the return to formality felt deliberate, like a line he drew to protect both of them. "If I tell you everything today, you'll walk out." Vivian's fingers tightened around her pen. "You don't know that." Robert's eyes sharpened. "I do." Vivian forced herself to inhale slowly. "Then give me enough to do my job properly." Robert hesitated. For the first time, something like fatigue flickered across his face, like he was tired of being a headline, like he was tired of holding his own life at arm's length. He nodded once. "You'll get the guest count," he said. "You'll get the layout approvals. You'll get full security coordination. And you'll get one thing from me that you're not used to getting from men like me." Vivian's voice came out quieter than she wanted. "What's that?" Robert looked at her as if he could see the cautious hope she tried to bury. "Respect," he said. Vivian's throat tightened. She wanted to scoff, to protect herself with sarcasm, to remind him that respect was the bare minimum, not a gift. But her body betrayed her. Her heart betrayed her. Because in that single word, spoken without performance, she heard something dangerously sincere. She steadied herself. "Then we'll be fine." Robert's gaze lingered. "I hope so." Vivian glanced down at her notes, forcing her attention back to logistics, because if she stared at him one more second, she might forget why she came to Miami at all. As they continued the walkthrough, Celeste appeared at the terrace doors, her expression tight. "Robert," she called, crisp. "We need to discuss messaging." Robert's jaw tightened. "Later." Celeste's eyes darted to Vivian, assessing. "Miss Reed, you'll receive an NDA packet by the end of the day." Vivian lifted her chin. "I'll review it." Celeste's smile was thin. "You'll sign it." Vivian met her gaze without flinching. "I'll sign what is ethical." The air turned sharp. Robert's eyes moved to Vivian, then to Celeste. His voice was calm, but there was steel beneath it. "Celeste," he said, "if you want her to do her job, you don't threaten her, you support her." Celeste blinked, startled, then recovered quickly. "I'm protecting you." Robert's gaze didn't soften. "You're protecting the brand. There's a difference." Vivian felt heat rise behind her eyes, not because she was grateful, because she wasn't used to being defended in a room full of power. Celeste pressed her lips together. "Fine, we'll talk later." She turned and disappeared into the house. The moment she left, the ocean seemed louder. Vivian looked at Robert, unsure what to say without breaking the fragile professional line between them. Robert spoke first. "You don't scare easily," he said. Vivian's laugh was quiet, humorless. "That's what happens when you've already been broken once." Robert's gaze sharpened, something dark and protective moving beneath his control. "Who did it?" Vivian froze. The question was too personal, too quick, too intimate. She forced a calm smile. "That's not part of the event plan." Robert held her gaze. "Maybe it should be." Vivian's heartbeat stuttered, and she hated that she couldn't pretend it didn't. She took a step back, not running, just reclaiming her space. "Send me the information I requested," she said softly. "Vendor list, schedule, guest flow, security protocol." Robert nodded once, as if accepting her boundary. "You'll have it," he said. Then quieter, almost like a confession he didn't intend to give. "And Vivian, thank you for not treating me like a headline." Vivian's chest tightened. She didn't trust her voice, so she only nodded. As she walked back down the stone path toward the waiting vehicle, she felt his gaze on her back like heat from the sun. Not possessive, not arrogant, intentional. Vivian slid into the car, closed the door, and stared out the window as the gates opened again. She should have felt relieved. Instead, she felt unsettled, as if something inside her had shifted by a fraction, and she didn't know how to put it back. The ocean glittered beside the road. Miami kept shining, like nothing could ever go wrong here. Vivian pressed her fingertips lightly against the chain at her throat, grounding herself. "It's just a job," she whispered. But her heart didn't believe her. Not anymore. Vivian Reed woke before her alarm, the way people do when their lives are balanced on something fragile. For a moment, she lay still in the unfamiliar quiet of her small apartment, staring at the pale ceiling, while Miami's morning light slipped through the blinds like it owned the place. She told herself she wasn't thinking about Robert Sinclair, but her body betrayed her anyway. She could still feel the weight of his gaze from the terrace, the way his voice had said, "Respect," as if it were a vow instead of a courtesy. That single word had followed her into sleep, like a hand resting lightly on her shoulder, not forcing her to turn around, only reminding her someone had noticed she was there. Vivian sat up and pressed her feet to the floor. Cold tile, a grounding sensation. She moved through her routine with deliberate precision, as if structure could keep her from slipping into emotion. Coffee, shower, hair pulled back. A fitted cream blouse and tailored sand-colored trousers, the kind of outfit that said competence without apology. She fastened her simple chain necklace and looked at herself in the mirror. "You're here to work," she whispered. Her phone buzzed. An email from Azure Palms Hospitality. Subject, NDA packet attached, signed before noon. Vivian's jaw tightened. She opened the attachment and skimmed the first page, then the second, then the third. The language was polished, sleek and sharp in the way expensive things often were. It wasn't just an agreement to protect a client's privacy. It was a muzzle. She kept reading until she found the clause that made her pulse spike. No disclosure of any information, observation or incident related to the client, regardless of legality, ethics or potential harm, without written permission from the client's representative. Vivian's fingers went cold around her phone. That wasn't privacy. That was power. Her gaze lifted to the window. The city outside looked bright and carefree, as if no one had ever been cornered in a contract in their life. Vivian exhaled slowly, then forwarded the email to herself with notes, the way she used to do when she had no one else to trust. Her phone buzzed again, this time with a message from Celeste. "Car picks you up in 40. Signed NDA required to proceed." Vivian stared at the words, then typed back with controlled calm. "I'll sign a standard confidentiality agreement. I will not sign a clause that requires silence about wrongdoing." A pause. Then Celeste replied, "You do not get to negotiate with him." Vivian's lips pressed together. She could almost hear Celeste's voice, crisp and dismissive, telling her she was temporary and replaceable. Vivian typed back anyway. "Then you should replace me." She set her phone down, heart steady now, the way it always became when she chose dignity over fear. She finished her coffee without tasting it. When the black car arrived, Vivian slid into the back seat with her tablet and notebook, posture straight, face calm. The driver didn't speak. Miami flowed past in clean lines and glossy colors. But Vivian's mind was elsewhere, already building contingencies. If they removed her from the account, she would survive. She had survived worse. But her chest tightened at the thought of leaving that terrace unfinished, leaving Robert Sinclair's quiet intensity unresolved. It annoyed her that her heart kept trying to turn professionalism into a story. The gates opened again, smooth and silent. Carter Wainwright was waiting, sunglasses on, expression unreadable. He nodded once and led her through the property without small talk. Vivian's attention flicked instinctively to the details she'd noted yesterday. The corridor that needed order, the staff entrance points, the camera placement that was both discreet and unmissable. Quiet luxury was never truly quiet. It simply hid its machinery better. On the terrace, Robert was already there, jacketless, sleeves rolled again, a phone in one hand, looking out toward the ocean, as if it was the only thing that didn't ask anything from him. He turned at her footsteps, and Vivian's breath caught in a way she refused to acknowledge. "Morning," Robert said. His voice sounded like it belonged to early hours and private thoughts. "Morning," Vivian replied, crisp. "We have a problem." His gaze sharpened with interest, not irritation. "Already?" Vivian held up her tablet. "Your NDA packet." Robert's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes cooled. "That came from Celeste. It came under your name," Vivian said calmly. "And I won't sign it as written." A beat of silence. Carter shifted subtly a few paces away, as if giving them space while still guarding the perimeter of the world. Robert stepped closer, not looming, just present. The ocean wind stirred the hem of Vivian's blouse. "Most people sign," he said. Vivian met his eyes. "Most people are afraid to say no." Something flickered across his face. Approval, sharp and unexpected. "Tell me what you don't like," Robert said. Vivian tapped the clause. "This. It requires me to stay silent, even if I witness something illegal or harmful. I won't be part of that." Robert's jaw tightened slightly. "You think I'd need that kind of protection?" Vivian didn't flinch. "I think powerful people often accept protection they don't understand because they're used to being insulated from consequences." His gaze held hers. A long, charged silence where neither of them blinked first. Vivian felt the tension in the air like a held note. Then Robert exhaled slowly, as if releasing something he'd been carrying. "You're not wrong," he said quietly. "But you're also not going to accuse me without knowing what you're doing." "I'm not accusing you," Vivian replied. "I'm refusing a muzzle." Robert's eyes dipped to her mouth again for a fraction of a second, and Vivian's pulse responded like a traitor. He looked back up, controlled. "You really don't scare easily." Vivian's voice softened, not because she wanted to, but because there was something in him that pulled honesty out of her. "I learned the hard way that fear is expensive." Robert studied her as if he wanted to ask what that meant, and then stopped himself, a rare restraint. He lifted his phone and typed a quick message, then looked back at her. "I'll have it revised. Standard confidentiality. No unethical clause." Vivian blinked, momentarily caught off guard by how quickly he gave ground. "You're doing that," she said, careful. Robert's mouth curved slightly, almost a smile. "You're doing your job. That's what I hired you for." Vivian's throat tightened at the word hired. She reminded herself not to make it personal. "Good," she said. "Then we can move on." Robert's gaze lingered. "We can." They walked the property again, but this time the air between them felt different. Not lighter, more charged, as if a boundary had been tested and survived. Vivian pointed out the terrace flow. Guests should enter from the east walkway to avoid bottlenecking. Staff should move behind the hedgeline. Drink station here, but hidden until the first hour to keep the initial atmosphere clean. Robert listened with full attention, not pretending, not looking past her shoulder. That focus was unsettling in its intimacy. "I want it to feel effortless," he said. "It will," Vivian replied. "Effortless is the most difficult thing to build." Robert's gaze warmed slightly. "You make it sound like an art." "It is," Vivian said. "It's choreography. It's psychology. People don't just attend a party. They attend a feeling." Robert leaned on the railing again, watching her as if she were the feeling he didn't know how to name. "And what feeling do you think I want?" he asked. Vivian paused, pen hovering over her notes. She looked at the ocean, then back at him. "You want control," she said honestly, "but not because you're arrogant, because you're tired of being handled." Something tightened in Robert's face, the smallest crack in his composure. Vivian felt it like a tug in her own chest. He didn't deny it. He simply said, "And you?" Vivian's fingers tightened around her pen. "I want clarity." Robert's eyes narrowed slightly. "About what?" Vivian hesitated. If she answered truthfully, she would step over a line she wasn't sure she could step back from. She chose the safer truth. About the plan. About expectations. About what you consider non-negotiable. Robert watched her carefully. "And what do you consider non-negotiable, Vivian?" Hearing her name again felt like a hand on her wrist. She kept her face calm. "My dignity," she said. For a second, Robert looked like he didn't know what to do with a woman who said that without apology. Then he nodded once. Good. Before Vivian could respond, Celeste appeared from the house, sleek and sharp as ever. She walked toward them with the kind of confidence that came from believing she belonged everywhere. "Robert," Celeste said, voice bright but clipped. "The press is sniffing around. We need to finalize the talking points." Vivian felt Robert's energy shift, like a door closing. "I told you later," Robert replied. Celeste's smile tightened. "Later becomes too late. I'm protecting you." Robert's gaze turned cold. "You're protecting the myth." Celeste's eyes flicked toward Vivian, assessing her like an item on a shelf. "Is she signed yet?" Vivian lifted her chin. "Not as written." Celeste's expression sharpened. "Then she doesn't proceed." Vivian didn't look away. "Then you should find someone else." The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. Robert's gaze moved between them, and Vivian waited for him to choose the path he always chose, the one that kept things smooth, safe, controlled. Instead, Robert's voice came out calm and final. "She proceeds," he said. Celeste blinked. "Robert, revise the NDA," Robert cut in, "and don't speak to her like she's disposable." Celeste's cheeks flushed, anger and disbelief flashing behind her polished mask. "You're letting an event coordinator dictate your legal protections." Robert's eyes hardened. "I'm letting a competent professional do her job without compromising her ethics." Vivian felt heat rise behind her eyes, not because she needed defending, but because she wasn't used to someone choosing her side in a room where power spoke loudest. Celeste pressed her lips together, then gave a stiff nod. "Fine." She turned sharply and walked away. Vivian exhaled slowly, trying to steady the tremor in her chest. Robert looked at her, and for a moment, the guarded billionaire facade was gone. There was only a man who seemed tired. "You're going to cause trouble," he murmured. Vivian's laugh was soft, controlled. "Only for people who deserve it." Robert's gaze held hers. "I don't know if I should thank you for that." "You can start with not calling me trouble," Vivian said. A faint smile finally touched his mouth. "What should I call you?" Vivian's breath caught because the question felt too intimate for daylight. She cleared her throat. "Call me when the vendor list is updated." Robert's eyes darkened with amusement. "Deflection." "Professionalism," Vivian corrected. "Right," he said, and the way he said it made the word sound like a private joke between them. They moved into the practical work of the day. Vendors arriving with samples, staff walking the route, Carter coordinating security sweeps. Vivian directed with calm authority, her voice steady, her movements precise. She could feel Robert watching her at times, not like a client watching an employee, but like a man learning the outline of a woman he couldn't easily dismiss. By late afternoon, clouds gathered over the ocean, thick and bruised at the edges. The humidity turned heavy, the air sticking to skin. Vivian stood under the terrace awning, watching the sky shift with a planner's dread. Carter approached, phone in hand. "Storm line moving in faster than predicted. We may need to adjust setup timing." Vivian nodded. "We will." Robert joined them, gaze fixed on the horizon. "How bad?" Vivian spoke with calm certainty. "Bad enough to ruin anything that isn't anchored." Robert's eyes turned toward her. "Then anchor everything." Vivian's mouth almost curved. "That's why you hired me." As the first gusts of wind hit, the property became a controlled frenzy. Staff secured linens, moved decor into protected areas, double-checked lighting rigs. Vivian's voice cut through the chaos, clear and steady. Stronger ties on the lantern frames, no glass near the sand. Move the floral arch under cover. Now. Robert didn't hover. He didn't undermine. He watched, then quietly stepped in where needed, lifting a heavy base with disciplined strength, handing it to a staff member without a word of superiority. Vivian noticed. Of course she did. The storm didn't fully break, but it threatened, teasing the edge of disaster. By the time the wind calmed, the sun had dipped low, painting the clouds in muted gold. The staff dispersed, exhausted. Vivian remained on the terrace, reviewing notes, checking her tablet, making sure every fix had been documented. The ocean looked darker now, calmer, like it had decided not to punish them today. She heard footsteps behind her and didn't need to look to know it was him. Robert stopped beside her, close enough that she could feel warmth from his body. Vivian's hand tightened slightly around her tablet. "You handled that like you've done it 100 times," he said. Vivian kept her gaze on her screen. "I've handled worse." Robert's voice lowered. "You keep saying things like that." Vivian's throat tightened. She didn't want to invite questions. She didn't want to invite tenderness. She looked up anyway. Robert's eyes were different in the evening light. Less icy, more human. The lines at the corners of his eyes looked like they came from endurance, not arrogance. "You don't have to keep your guard up with me every second," he said quietly. Vivian's laugh was soft, almost bitter. "Yes, I do." Robert's gaze held hers, and there it was again, that dangerous focus that made her feel like the only person in the world. "Why?" he asked. Vivian felt the question settle into her chest like a weight. She could have lied. She could have smiled and turned it into a joke. Instead, she told a truth that wasn't the whole story, but enough to bleed. "Because I've trusted the wrong people," she said, "and I promised myself I wouldn't pay that price again." Robert's eyes softened, and Vivian hated how much she wanted to lean into that softness. He lifted his hand slowly, not touching her, only hovering near her wrist, as if asking permission without words. Vivian froze, breath shallow. Robert's fingers brushed her sleeve lightly, almost nothing, barely a contact, but it sent a sharp warmth through her skin. "You don't look like someone who deserves to be punished for having a heart," he murmured. Vivian's eyes stung, and she hated herself for it. Don't what?" Robert asked, voice low. "Don't say things like that," Vivian whispered, "because I'll start believing you." Robert's gaze dropped to her lips again, slower this time, and Vivian's body responded before her mind could stop it. Her heartbeat thundered in her ears. The space between them felt suddenly too small, too charged. Robert leaned in slightly, not claiming, only moving as if pulled by something he couldn't control. Vivian didn't step back. Her breath hitched, and she felt the heat of him, the restraint in him, the tension contained like a storm that had chosen to wait. Then a sharp vibration cut through the moment. Robert's phone buzzed. The sound broke the spell like a glass shattering on tile. Robert's expression changed instantly. The warmth drained out, replaced by something guarded and hard. He glanced at the screen, and Vivian saw his jaw tighten. "What is it?" she asked softly, instinctive concern slipping out before she could hide it. Robert didn't answer right away. His thumb moved quickly, typing a response. The ocean wind stirred again, and the air suddenly felt colder. Carter appeared from the side path, moving fast but controlled. "Sir." Robert's gaze flicked to Vivian for half a second, and in that look she saw it. Fear. Not panic. Something deeper, more disciplined, the kind of fear a man hides behind control. Vivian's chest tightened. Robert put his phone away, and his voice returned to calm professionalism. But it was different now. Closed. "Change of plans," he said to Carter. "Double perimeter tonight. No one enters without clearance." Carter nodded. "Understood." Vivian swallowed. "Robert, what's happening?" Robert's gaze lingered on her face, and for a moment it looked like he wanted to tell her everything. Like he wanted to trust her with the truth, the way she had almost trusted him with her vulnerability. Then the wall came back up. "It's nothing you need to worry about," he said. Vivian's pride flared. "That's not your decision." Robert's eyes sharpened, and his voice softened in a way that felt dangerous. "Vivian, please." The single word felt like a hand closing gently around her wrist. Vivian's anger faltered, replaced by a quiet fear she didn't want to admit. She nodded once, forcing calm. "Fine, but it affects operations. If security changes, I need to know." Robert's gaze held hers, intense and unreadable. "You'll know what you need to know." Vivian's throat tightened at the evasiveness. She wanted to push, to demand clarity, to refuse being kept in the dark. But the way Robert looked at her in that moment wasn't dismissive. It was protective. And somehow, that made her chest ache more. Robert stepped back, creating distance as if he could physically separate her from whatever had reached him through that phone. His voice stayed controlled. "Go home," he said. "Rest. Tomorrow will be busy." Vivian hated the order, hated that part of her wanted to obey. "I decide when I go." Robert's gaze softened briefly, almost a smile. "Then decide to go." Vivian held his eyes for one long second, breathing through the tension. "Good night," she said. Robert's voice came out lower, almost intimate despite the guardedness. "Good night, Vivian." She walked away with her spine straight, refusing to look back, refusing to let him see how much her hands trembled. But the moment she reached the car, she couldn't help it. She glanced back toward the terrace. Robert was still there, standing near the railing, the ocean behind him like a dark mirror. His shoulders were rigid now, his face turned slightly away, as if he was listening for something only he could hear. Vivian slid into the car, heart pounding. Miami's lights blurred past as the driver took her back through gated streets and polished neighborhoods. The city looked the same as it had this morning, bright and glamorous and indifferent. But Vivian felt different. She pressed her fingertips to the chain at her throat again, trying to anchor herself. She had come here for a job, for money, for a fresh start. And yet, as she stared out the window into the glowing night, one thought kept rising like a tide she couldn't stop. Robert Sinclair wasn't only a man who made the air feel electric. He was a man hiding something that frightened even him. And Vivian was beginning to suspect that standing near him might cost her more than she was prepared to pay. Vivian Reed woke with the strange sensation that the night had not ended. Her dreams had been filled with fragments of the terrace, the ocean, and the way Robert Sinclair had whispered her name, as if it carried a weight he hadn't meant to reveal. She rolled onto her back, staring at the ceiling of her small apartment while the early Miami light pressed gently against her blinds. She exhaled slowly and told herself she was fine. She was composed. She was here to work. But her heart didn't listen. She moved through her morning carefully, grounding herself in routine. Hair pulled into smooth waves instead of a ponytail. Not because of Robert, she insisted, but because professionalism sometimes required polish. A soft lilac blouse, high-waisted ivory trousers, and minimal earrings completed the look. When she glanced in the mirror, she saw a woman trying not to tremble under the memory of a near touch, a near confession, a near moment that could have changed everything. Her phone buzzed. A message from Azure Palms. "Car outside, revised NDA ready. Client requests your presence early." Requests, not demands. Vivian's pulse shifted. She grabbed her tablet, her notebook, her courage, and headed downstairs. The drive felt shorter than usual, as if the city itself had been compressed into a tunnel, leading her straight to him. The gates opened. Carter Wainwright stood waiting, posture professional, gaze scanning the perimeter. "Ms. Reed," he said with a nod. "Mr. Sinclair instructed that you meet him on the East Terrace." Vivian blinked. The East Terrace wasn't part of the event setup. It was private space. She followed the winding path along the side of the villa. The ocean breeze lifted her hair, carrying the scent of salt and the distant hum of a boat engine. When she rounded the corner, she stopped. Robert Sinclair stood with his back to her, hands in his pockets, staring at the waves as if trying to understand something in their rhythm. He wore a charcoal shirt today, sleeves rolled as always, the fabric hugging his shoulders in a way that made Vivian's breath falter. He turned at the sound of her footsteps. And for a few seconds, neither of them spoke. Robert's gaze swept over her, slowly, not greedily, not possessively, but with a kind of reverence that made Vivian's heart stumble. He looked at her as if her presence had altered the temperature of the morning. "Vivian," he said softly, her name slipping from his mouth like something meant only for private air. "Good morning," she answered, keeping her tone steady even though her pulse wasn't. He gestured toward the small seating area tucked under an awning. A simple table held 2 glasses of cold water, condensation gathering on the surface. "I asked you here," Robert said, "because we need to discuss something important before the team arrives." Vivian raised her chin slightly. "If this is about security again, then I need details." "It's not only that," he replied, stepping closer. "It's about you." Vivian's heartbeat misfired. He must have seen it on her face, because his expression softened, almost apologetic. "Sit," he said gently. She didn't sit. She stepped closer instead, straightening her shoulders. "What is it, Robert?" The faintest smile touched his lips. "You say my name differently." Vivian inhaled sharply. "Don't do that." "Do what?" he asked, voice low. "Turn everything into tension," she whispered. Robert's gaze deepened. "I don't create the tension, Vivian. I just stop pretending it isn't there." Vivian's breath shook, but she recovered quickly, folding her arms in a quiet shield. "Tell me why you called me here." Robert nodded, letting the moment settle. He walked to the table, picked up a folder, and held it out to her. "The revised NDA," he said. "Reviewed by my legal team, cleared of anything unethical. You can sign it without compromising yourself." Vivian flipped through it, scanning the clauses quickly. Clean, straightforward, no traps. Relief softened her shoulders. "Thank you," she said. "You were right to refuse the first version," Robert replied. "It wasn't meant to silence you, just to protect me." Vivian met his eyes. "I don't want to protect your myth. I only protect the truth." A flicker of something raw crossed Robert's expression. "I know," he said quietly. "That's why I want you near this event." The words hit her harder than she expected. Before she could respond, Robert motioned for her to sit with him. Vivian hesitated, then lowered herself into the cushioned chair. Robert sat across from her, but leaned forward slightly, elbows on his knees, posture too intimate to feel casual. "There's another reason I asked for this meeting," he said, "and I need you to hear me clearly." Vivian braced herself. "At the celebration," Robert continued, "I need you by my side." Vivian blinked. "By your side? As staff?" "No," he said softly. "As my guest." Her pulse thudded. "Why?" Robert inhaled slowly, searching her face as if afraid of misreading it. "Because there will be people there who would interpret your presence as something else, something romantic, and I need them to think that." Vivian stared at him. "Why me?" Robert's voice dropped into something almost vulnerable. "Because when you stand in a room, people look at you without knowing why. Because you command attention without trying. Because you're the only person I trust not to betray me." Vivian swallowed hard. "Robert, inviting me as your guest could be misinterpreted." "I know," he murmured. "That's the point." She shook her head slowly, trying to understand. "You want them to think we're together?" Robert's gaze locked onto hers, and the air grew thick between them. "I want them to think I'm not alone," he said. The confession was quiet, intimate, and deeply unsettling. Vivian felt the words slide under her skin, warming everything they touched. "Why me?" she whispered again, but the question sounded different this time, more afraid of the answer. Robert leaned closer. "Because you don't orbit my world. You don't chase power or money. You don't want a piece of me." He paused, eyes softening. "You look at me like I'm human." Vivian's breath trembled. "Maybe that's the problem. You need a shield. Not whatever you think this is." Robert's lips curved into the smallest, saddest smile. "I don't think this is anything, Vivian. I feel it." Vivian's pulse pounded in her ears. "It's inappropriate." "It's honest," Robert corrected. She stood abruptly, needing space. The ocean breeze tugged at her blouse, cooling the heat rising in her chest. "I'm your coordinator," she said, voice shaking slightly. "Not your date." Robert rose too, but slowly, deliberately, giving her space while still anchoring the moment. "I'm not asking for a date." Vivian turned to him. "Then what are you asking for?" Robert stepped closer, not enough to touch her, but enough to make the air vibrate. "Your presence," he said softly. "Your calm, your clarity, and yes, the way you look at me when you forget to guard yourself." Vivian felt her heart twist painfully. "Robert, I need you there," he said. "Not as staff, not as decoration, as someone whose steadiness keeps me from losing myself." Vivian's breath caught. Then he added, almost a whisper, "And because I want you there." She closed her eyes, fighting the warmth spreading through her chest. "You're asking too much," she said. "I'm asking the truth," Robert replied. When she looked at him again, he was closer. So close she could smell the faint notes of cedar on his skin. She felt the gravity of his presence, the quiet longing he tried so hard not to show. Vivian's voice came out soft. "It will complicate things. Everything worth keeping is complicated," he murmured. She stared at him, searching him, wanting to understand the man beneath all the headlines. And she found something she hadn't expected. Sincerity. A kind of loneliness disguised as strength. Her resolve weakened. "Robert," she whispered, "people will talk." "Let them," he said. "I care what you think, not them." The words wrapped around her like warm hands, dangerous and irresistible. He raised a hand slowly, giving her every opportunity to move away. When she didn't, he touched her cheek with the back of his fingers, feather light, reverent, almost trembling. Vivian inhaled sharply. "Don't look at me like that," he whispered. "Like what?" she asked, breathless. "Like I'm the reason your heart is beating faster." Vivian's knees weakened. She stepped back out of instinct for survival, not rejection. Her voice trembled as she spoke. "If I accept this invitation, it needs to be clear. It cannot be romantic." Robert's smile was devastatingly soft, but it already is. "Robert," she warned, chest tightening. He lifted both hands in surrender, though his eyes never left hers. "I'll behave, I promise." Vivian exhaled shakily, knowing she was dangerously close to saying yes. Before she could respond, Mrs. Delgado appeared from the side walkway, holding a clipboard. "Oh, thank heavens," she said, barely noticing the tension in the air. "Vivian, the floral vendor is early and demanding someone who speaks sense. And Mr. Sinclair, your chef is having a meltdown over the dessert display." Vivian pressed a palm to her forehead. "Of course he is." Mrs. Delgado looked between them then, eyes narrowing with grandmotherly intuition. "Careful, Ms. Reed," she murmured. "Men like him, they don't fall, they pull." Vivian's cheeks warmed, but she forced calm into her voice. "I'm fine." Mrs. Delgado raised a brow. "That's what they all say." Robert folded his hands behind his back, pretending innocence, but not pulling his gaze away from Vivian for even a second. She hated how much that gaze affected her. Vivian cleared her throat. "We should get to work." Robert nodded. "Will you consider what I asked?" She met his eyes. "I'll think about it." His expression softened. "Thank you." They spent the next hours coordinating vendors, adjusting timelines, managing egos, and refining every inch of the event's layout. Yet under every efficiently delivered instruction and every professional exchange, something unspoken thrummed like a hidden current between them. A glance that lingered too long, a brush of hands when passing a clipboard, a moment of silence that felt like a held breath. Near sunset, Vivian stood at the far end of the terrace reviewing final placement notes. The golden light wrapped around her like a soft veil, catching in her hair, illuminating her in a way that made her look almost unreal. Robert approached quietly, his footsteps barely audible on the stone. "Have you decided?" he asked, voice low. Vivian turned. "You're impossible, but honest," he murmured. She sighed, studying him, the way the fading sunlight softened his features, the way he seemed both powerful and unbearably human. Finally, she nodded once. "I'll come," she said softly. Something in Robert's expression broke open, relief, gratitude, and something dangerously close to longing. "Vivian," he whispered, "you have no idea what that means to me." She stepped back just enough to steady herself. "But understand this. I'm coming because it helps your event, not because I'm involved." His gaze darkened, but not with disappointment, with restraint. "I'll take whatever you give," he said quietly, "as long as you're there." Vivian turned away to hide the way her breath caught. The wind lifted her hair again, wrapping the moment in warmth and salt, and something heartbreakingly tender. "Tomorrow," she said. "Tomorrow," Robert echoed, voice soft as the dusk around them. And for the first time since she'd arrived in Miami, Vivian felt the terrifying sweetness of possibility. The night arrived with the kind of beauty that made people believe in destiny. Miami glowed beneath a sky of soft violet and shimmering gold, the ocean folding onto the sand in gentle waves that seemed to whisper secrets no one could hold for long. Lanterns flickered along the private beach, their warm light trembling like hearts on the verge of confession. Vivian Reed stood in the mirror of her small apartment and hardly recognized herself. Her dress was a deep, muted teal that seemed to shift with every breath she took. Simple, elegant, sleeveless, with a soft drape that followed the line of her waist without clinging. Her hair, usually tied back for work, now fell in smooth waves past her shoulders. She had chosen understated makeup, but her lips wore a shade that promised she had stopped lying to herself, at least for one night. She inhaled slowly. "It's just a professional appearance," she whispered. But the woman in the mirror didn't believe her. Her phone buzzed. The car had arrived. By the time she stepped outside, the evening air wrapped around her like warm silk. She slid into the vehicle and let the city pass in flashes of neon and shadow, her heartbeat sinking with the rhythm of anticipation she was terrified to acknowledge. When the gates of Robert Sinclair's villa opened, Vivian felt her stomach drop. The property had been transformed. Thousands of soft lights dotted the walkway, like constellations pulled down from the sky and laid carefully along the path for her arrival. The terrace glowed with golden tones. Staff moved silently. Music drifted through the air. Strings, soft and addictive. Vivian stepped out of the car and felt the world pause. Carter Wainwright approached, dressed in a dark suit, expression steady. "Ms. Reed," he said with a hint of warmth, "right this way." And as she walked, Vivian felt every set of eyes on her, staff, assistants, even the security team, but she didn't feel judged. She felt seen, and that frightened her more. When she reached the edge of the terrace, she saw him. Robert stood under the soft glow of lanterns near the ocean railing, speaking quietly with a coordinator. He wore a tailored black suit, no tie, the top button of his shirt undone. The look was polished, but there was something unguarded in the way the breeze moved through his hair. He looked like a man made for nights like this, magnetic, composed, surrounded by elegance. But the moment he turned and saw her, everything in him changed. His eyes widened, breath caught, posture straightened. The entire event seemed to dim except for the space between them. Vivian didn't move at first. Neither did he. Then Robert stepped toward her, each stride deliberate, every inch of him focused entirely on her. When he reached her, he didn't speak immediately. He simply looked at her like she was the first honest thing he had seen in months. "Vivian," he said finally, voice low and reverent, "you're breathtaking." Vivian felt heat bloom at the base of her throat. "Thank you," she said softly. "This event turned out beautiful." Robert's gaze didn't leave her face. "It's nothing compared to you." Her breath hitched. She looked away, desperate for air. "We should stay focused." He smiled slightly, soft, controlled, the kind of smile that said he was trying not to touch her even though every part of him wanted to. "We will," he murmured, "but allow me one moment." He stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth of his body, the faint scent of cedar and citrus. "I'm grateful you're here," he whispered. Vivian swallowed hard. "You asked." "Yes," he said, "but you came." Before she could respond, Celeste approached briskly, clipboard in hand, voice tense. "Robert, the photographer needs approval on the glow setup, and the guests are gathering inside." Robert didn't look at her. Not immediately. His attention remained on Vivian, and for a heartbeat, Celeste was not part of his world. "Give me a minute," he told her. Celeste's jaw tightened, but she nodded and retreated. Vivian took a slow breath. "The guests are arriving. We should..." "I know," Robert said quietly. "Walk with me." He offered his arm. Vivian hesitated. She shouldn't. She knew she shouldn't. But something in his eyes, something tired, earnest, and undeniably drawn to her, pulled her forward. She took his arm. The warmth of him seeped into her skin, calm and steadying. He guided her into the villa, through softly lit hallways, past staff who pretended not to stare. As they approached the great room, Vivian could hear the swell of conversation, the polite laughter of wealthy guests, the clinking of crystal. Every step closer made her heart pound harder. When they reached the entrance, Robert paused. He turned to her, face serious. "There's something I need you to remember tonight." Vivian looked up. "What is it?" His voice softened to a whisper, meant for no one else. "You're not alone here." Her chest tightened painfully. "Robert!" He brought his free hand up, not touching her, only hovering near her cheek, close enough to make her skin tingle. "If any moment becomes overwhelming," he said, "look at me." Vivian felt a tremor of emotion she hadn't prepared for. "I don't get overwhelmed." His eyes softened with a tenderness that almost broke her. "You do," he said gently. "You just hide it better than most." Before she could answer, Carter gave a subtle signal from across the room. Guests were ready. Cameras were adjusting. The event was shifting toward its centerpiece. Robert released her arms slowly, reluctantly. "It's time," he murmured. Vivian nodded, steadying herself. "I'll be nearby." "No," Robert corrected softly. "You'll be with me." They walked through the entrance together, and a ripple of whispered surprise moved through the crowd. Vivian felt dozens of eyes turning toward them, assessing, curious, speculative. Robert ignored them all. He placed a hand at the small of her back. Not possessive, not showy, only supportive. The gesture made Vivian's knees weaken for a split second. He stepped onto the small raised platform where the microphone waited. Vivian remained at the edge, partially hidden, but close enough that Robert could reach her with a glance. The room settled into expectant quiet. Robert gripped the microphone lightly, his posture composed. But when he looked at Vivian, something unguarded flashed in his eyes, something like fear, something like hope, and something like a silent apology for what he was about to do. "Thank you all for being here," he began, voice carrying easily through the space. "Tonight is not a public affair. It's personal." Vivian's stomach tightened. Robert continued, "I want to share something important, something that has weighed on me for a long time." Guests leaned forward, eager for revelation. Vivian's breath grew shallow. Robert looked toward the side entrance and gave a subtle nod. The door opened. A boy stepped inside, small, delicate, dressed too formally for his age in a pale shirt tucked neatly into navy shorts. His sandy hair fell softly over worried eyes. He clutched the cuff of his sleeve with nervous fingers. The crowd inhaled collectively. Vivian's hand rose instinctively to her chest. Robert turned back to the microphone. "This is Ethan," he said quietly, "and I intend to take legal guardianship of him." A soft, shocked murmur rippled through the room. Vivian froze. Guardianship. The word echoed in her mind like a bell struck too hard. She looked at the boy again. Ethan. He looked so unsure, so alone, and yet so composed, like a child taught to behave perfectly no matter how frightened he felt. Vivian's throat tightened painfully. Suddenly, another figure appeared beside Ethan. A woman. Tall, poised, dressed in a white designer jumpsuit with gold accents. Her dark hair was sleek and immaculate, framing a face that photographed beautifully from any angle. She placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder with exaggerated delicacy, smiling as if she had rehearsed it. Camilla Vale. Vivian didn't know her name yet, but she felt everything she needed to feel, and none of it was good. Camilla walked forward with Ethan, guiding him gently, too gently, like a doll being positioned. Cameras discreetly clicked. Guests murmured words like, "Oh my God," and "He looks like him." Vivian felt the room tilting. Robert's eyes flicked to her, fast, apologetic, unbearably conflicted. Vivian understood in that moment that he had kept something enormous from her, and she didn't know whether it was to protect her or to protect himself. Camilla leaned into the microphone with a soft laugh. "We're all very proud of Robert's decision. This little one deserves stability. Don't you, sweetheart?" Ethan looked up at her, then at Robert, then down at the ground. Vivian's chest cracked open with a silent ache she didn't have a name for. The room erupted into soft applause. Vivian felt dizzy. She took a slow step back from the platform, her pulse quickening. She could feel the walls closing in, the noise pressing against her like water rising too fast. She forced herself to breathe, but the air felt thick. Robert scanned the crowd until he found her. His expression shifted, alarm, then regret, then something almost pleading. Vivian turned and slipped out the side door. The corridor outside was quieter, but still buzzing with distant conversation. Lantern light cast trembling shadows across the walls as Vivian pressed a hand to her chest, trying to hold herself together. Why did it hurt? She had no right to hurt. She had no claim on him. She had promised herself not to hope. And yet seeing him on that stage, claiming a child, standing beside a woman who looked like she belonged on every front page, her heart felt like it had splintered in a dozen directions. Footsteps approached fast. "Vivian!" She didn't turn. She closed her eyes for one breath before facing him. Robert stood a few feet away, chest rising with hurried breaths, eyes searching her face as if desperate to read what she wasn't saying. "Vivian," he repeated, voice low and raw. "Please, let me explain." Vivian swallowed hard. "You should be inside." "I don't care," he said. Her voice trembled. "You introduced a child as someone you intend to take responsibility for. You didn't tell me." "I couldn't," Robert said, stepping closer. "Not before tonight, not yet." Vivian felt heat behind her eyes. She refused to let tears fall. "You brought me here as your guest, knowing this was coming." Robert's face twisted with emotion. "I brought you because I needed you near me." "Near you for what?" Vivian whispered. "So I wouldn't ruin the optics by walking away later." His jaw tightened. "No, near me, because when I look at you, I remember I still have a heart." The words hit her like a wave. Pain, hope, anger, longing, all tangled together. Vivian stepped back, needing distance. "Robert, this changes everything. I don't know what you expect from me now." Robert closed the gap with 2 measured steps, stopping only when their breaths mingled. "I don't expect anything," he whispered, "but I'm asking for something." Vivian forced herself to meet his eyes. "What?" "Don't walk away," he breathed. "Not tonight." Her heart pulled toward him like a tide, but her voice remained careful. "You have a child to protect, a woman beside him. Your world is complicated." Robert's voice broke slightly. "You think I don't know that?" Silence stretched, thick and trembling. Then a muffled voice called from inside the hall. "Robert, they need you for the photographs." He looked toward the doorway, jaw clenched, then back at Vivian. "Please," he whispered. "Stay. I'll find you as soon as I can." Vivian's breath shook. "I don't know if I can." Robert reached out, lifting a hand to touch her, then stopped himself inches from her cheek, trembling with restraint. "Stay," he repeated softly. "For me." Vivian closed her eyes. And for the first time since arriving in Miami, her heart made a decision before her mind could argue. "All right," she whispered. When she opened her eyes again, Robert's expression flooded with relief. A relief so profound, it almost broke her. He stepped back painfully slowly, as if leaving her was the hardest thing he had done in years. "I'll come find you," he promised. Then he disappeared inside, leaving Vivian alone in the dim corridor, her breath unsteady, her pulse trembling, her heart cracked, but still beating for reasons she wasn't ready to face. And somewhere deep in the villa, applause echoed again, this time sharper, brighter, and far more dangerous. Vivian remained in the quiet corridor long after Robert disappeared into the glow of the great room. She pressed her palms against the cool wall and tried to steady her breathing, but the trembling in her chest refused to settle. The music inside rose and fell in elegant waves, too beautiful for the storm building inside her. She felt foolish for letting herself feel hurt, foolish for letting her heart react as if she had any right to claim disappointment. And yet, disappointment flooded her anyway, hot, sharp, impossible to swallow. A child, a guardianship, a woman by his side. Vivian closed her eyes, willing the ache to soften. Footsteps approached, and she quickly straightened her shoulders. She wiped the emotion from her face as if removing stray powder, then turned. Mrs. Delgado appeared, carrying a tray with 2 glasses of sparkling water. Her warm eyes were full of concern. "I thought I might find you hiding," the older woman said softly. Vivian tried to smile. "Just needed air." Mrs. Delgado handed her a glass. "Breathe, mija." Vivian took a sip, grateful for the coolness. "It's nothing. I just wasn't expecting the announcement." "Ah," Mrs. Delgado murmured knowingly. "Life likes to surprise us when we feel safest." Safe. Vivian had almost felt safe with Robert. Almost. She forced a steady breath. "I should get back to the terrace." Mrs. Delgado placed a gentle hand on her arm. "You don't need to run from your feelings. But remember, this world, his world, is filled with illusions. Not everything is how it looks." Vivian swallowed. "What are you saying?" "That sometimes the person who seems like a threat is only holding a role they never wanted." The woman squeezed her arm. "And sometimes a man carries secrets that are heavier than they appear." Vivian felt her heartbeat shift, fear and curiosity intertwining. Before she could ask more, a call echoed faintly from down the hall. Staff needed attention. Mrs. Delgado gave her a sympathetic smile and drifted away. Vivian remained still for a long moment, the words echoing in her mind. Not everything is how it looks. She wished she believed that. Taking a deep breath, she walked back toward the terrace, her movements composed even though her heart still trembled. The evening air met her like a warm embrace. Lanterns flickered overhead, music floated gently, and laughter spilled from the villa's glowing interior. She blended into the shadows near a cluster of decorative palms, needing a buffer between her and the world. But the world didn't give her long. "Vivian?" a soft voice asked. She turned. Ethan stood there, small, shy, hands clasped in front of him. His pale shirt collar looked slightly crooked, and his eyes held a confusion that pierced her chest. "Hi," he whispered, as if afraid of the word. Vivian lowered herself to his level. "Hi, Ethan." He shifted his weight from one foot to the other. "Everyone is busy. I don't know where to stand." Vivian's heart softened instantly. She offered her hand without thinking. "You can stand with me." Ethan hesitated, then reached out. His small fingers curled around hers, trusting, warm. Vivian inhaled gently. "This must be a big night for you." He nodded. "I don't like being looked at." His voice wavered. "People expect me to smile. I don't always want to." Vivian's own childhood memories flickered. Expectations, pressure, standing straight, even when her knees wanted to buckle. She squeezed his hand lightly. "You don't have to smile," she said. "You only have to breathe." Ethan's eyes lifted to hers, surprised by the simplicity. Vivian guided him a few steps toward the terrace rail where the sea breeze softened the heat. They stood quietly together, and for a moment the noise of the event felt far away. "You know," Vivian said softly, "when I feel overwhelmed, I look at the ocean. It reminds me I don't have to be bigger than everything. I can just be me." Ethan looked toward the waves thoughtfully. "It makes me feel less lonely," he whispered. Vivian felt her throat tighten. "I know." Footsteps approached again, but heavier ones this time. Robert appeared in the doorway, scanning the terrace with urgency until his gaze landed on them. Relief washed over his features so visibly that Vivian's chest ached. He approached slowly, like someone afraid to startle something fragile. "Ethan," he said gently, "I was looking for you." Ethan's grip on Vivian's hand tightened before he released her and stepped back toward Robert. Robert placed a careful hand on the boy's shoulder. "Are you all right?" Ethan nodded, but his voice barely carried. "I didn't want to be in the pictures." Robert exhaled softly, then knelt to meet his eyes. "You don't have to do anything you don't want to. Do you understand?" Ethan nodded again, this time with slight relief. Robert brushed a stray lock of hair from the boy's forehead, with a tenderness that caught Vivian off guard. He wasn't posing. He wasn't pretending. He cared. Truly cared. Robert rose slowly, his expression shifting when he looked at Vivian. Something unspoken moved between them. Relief, gratitude, and a spark of something deeper. "You helped him," Robert said quietly. Vivian shrugged, trying to appear unaffected. He just needed a pause. Robert's gaze lingered, intense. "You speak to him the way no one else does." Vivian swallowed. "He deserves someone who listens." Robert's jaw flexed slightly. "He does." Silence stretched again, charged, delicate. Ethan tugged at Robert's sleeve. "Can Miss Vivian stay with us?" Robert's eyes softened. "If she wants to." Vivian felt the question settle into her like a warm ache. Ethan looked up at her with hopeful eyes, and suddenly the entire world seemed smaller, quieter. "Yes," she said gently, "I'll stay." Ethan's small smile was worth every tremor in her chest. They walked together along the edge of the terrace, Ethan staying close to Robert, occasionally glancing at Vivian as if making sure she hadn't vanished. The lights reflected on the waves, turning the ocean into a river of gold. But their quiet moment didn't last. From the corner of her eye, Vivian saw Camilla Vale approaching, the woman in white, her gold bracelets catching the lantern light, her smile sharp as glass. "There you are," Camilla said, her voice dripping with sweet exhaustion. "Everyone keeps asking about Ethan. We can't have the poor child disappearing, can we?" Her gaze slid to Vivian with polite disdain. "I don't believe we've met." Vivian offered a small, professional smile. "Vivian Reed. I'm coordinating the event." "How lovely," Camilla replied, her smile tightening as if the word lovely left a bitter taste. "And how generous of you to keep Ethan company." Robert's posture changed subtly, becoming protective. "Camilla," he said evenly. "Vivian was helping him breathe." Camilla blinked. "Helping him breathe. Is that what we call hiding now?" Vivian opened her mouth to speak, but Robert stepped slightly in front of her, body angled like a shield. "That's enough," he said quietly. Camilla's eyes narrowed, though her expression remained perfectly poised. "Robert, the board members are waiting for you. They'd like a word about appearances, considering tonight's announcement." Robert's jaw tightened. "I'll speak with them when I'm ready." Camilla's smile sharpened. "They won't wait forever." Vivian felt the tension coil between them, thick and suffocating. Robert exhaled slowly, then looked down at Ethan. "Go with Camilla for a moment. I'll join you shortly." Ethan's small shoulders slumped, but he nodded. Camilla took his hand a bit too eagerly. "Come, sweetheart, let's show them your brave smile." Ethan glanced back at Vivian, then at Robert, before being led away. When they were out of earshot, Robert turned to Vivian with a troubled expression. "I'm sorry," he said. "You don't owe me an apology," Vivian murmured. "Yes," he said, stepping closer. "I do." Vivian held his gaze. "She's close to you." Robert shook his head slowly. "Not the way you think." Vivian swallowed the knot tightening in her throat. "She certainly acts like she has access to every part of your life." "She doesn't," Robert replied, voice lower. "Not anymore." Vivian looked away toward the ocean, its waves brushing the shore in long, patient strokes. "Then why didn't you tell me about Ethan? About guardianship? About her?" "Because," Robert whispered, "I wanted to keep something in my life untouched. Something not consumed by complications." Vivian closed her eyes for a heartbeat. "You mean me?" "Yes," he breathed. A single tear threatened to gather at the corner of her eye, but she refused to let it fall. "Robert," she whispered, "I don't know where I stand in all of this." He stepped closer, almost touching her, his voice trembling with sincerity. "You stand where my heart looks when I need to breathe." Vivian inhaled sharply, the words winding around her like warm silk. He reached out, his fingertips brushing her arm lightly. "Vivian," he murmured, "look at me." She did, and the world narrowed to just them, their breaths mingling, their gazes locked in a quiet, electric longing. "You matter to me," Robert said, "more than I expected, more than I should admit." Vivian felt her lips part slightly, her pulse racing. Before she could answer, a voice called from inside. "Robert, the press is waiting." He exhaled frustratedly, but kept his eyes on her. "Please don't leave." Vivian nodded once. "I won't." Robert hesitated for half a heartbeat before brushing his fingers lightly against her waist. Almost a touch, almost a confession. Then stepping away, his expression torn. As he disappeared inside, Vivian leaned on the railing, the salty breeze cooling her flushed skin. Her heart thudded painfully. This night had changed everything, not because of announcements or guests or elegant lights, but because the man she had tried so hard to keep at arm's length had finally exposed the truth behind his guarded eyes. And now her own heart, careful, wounded, cautious, was no longer listening to her commands. Vivian remained on the terrace, her hands resting lightly on the railing as the ocean breathed in slow, rhythmic waves below. The night was stunning, almost painfully so, the kind of beauty that demanded stillness. Lantern light shimmered across the water, the breeze carried the scent of orchids from the floral arch, and distant laughter floated from inside the villa. Yet Vivian felt none of the serenity around her. Her chest felt tight, her thoughts tangled. Her heart beat with a rhythm she didn't trust. The moment in the corridor when Robert had whispered that she mattered. The way Ethan had clung to her hand as if she had been a lifeline. The cutting softness of Camilla's smile. The complicated tenderness in Robert's eyes. Everything crowded her mind like shadows vying for her attention. She inhaled deeply, but still the air felt thin. Vivian stepped away from the railing and moved to the quiet corner of the terrace, where the night grew darker and fewer guests wandered. She needed space, she needed silence, she needed something she couldn't name. Her phone buzzed. A simple message flashed on the screen. "Still with me?" Her breath caught. "Robert." She hesitated for only a second before typing back, "I'm here." Almost immediately, his reply appeared. "Don't leave." Vivian felt her chest tighten again. She pressed her phone to her palm, as if it could keep her steady. Then footsteps approached. Even before she turned, she felt rather than heard the familiar presence that seemed to weave itself into the air. Robert stopped a few feet away. Gone was the polished composure he had worn on the stage. His jacket was off, his shirt sleeves pushed higher than before, and his expression was etched with exhaustion. And something far more vulnerable. "Vivian," he said softly. Her name in his voice was an ache. Vivian cleared her throat, keeping her posture firm. "You should be inside." "I needed to see you," he said. His honesty, quiet, unadorned, made her pulse flutter painfully. Vivian crossed her arms lightly, as though forming a barrier she didn't actually want. "It's your event. You made a major announcement. People are going to have questions." He stepped closer. "Let them ask. I'm more concerned about what you're feeling right now." "Why?" she whispered. He searched her face, his eyes tracing the tension she tried so hard to hide. "Because when you walked out earlier, it felt like I lost something important." Vivian felt heat rise in her throat. "Robert, you can't talk to me like that." "Why not?" he asked gently. "Because it confuses things." He shook his head slowly. "No, it clarifies them." Vivian exhaled shakily. "Robert, a child is involved." His expression softened with a kind of ache. "Yes, and I'm doing everything in my power to protect him." Vivian swallowed. "Tell me the truth, all of it." A long silence stretched between them. The night breeze rustled the lanterns as if urging him on. Finally, Robert spoke, voice low and strained. "Ethan isn't mine." Vivian's breath caught. "He isn't?" she asked, barely audible. "No," Robert murmured. "Not biologically, not legally, not in any expected way." Her heartbeat pounded. "Then why?" "Because his mother was a friend." Robert said, closing his eyes briefly. And she died in circumstances no child should ever witness. Ethan had no one, and He paused. I owed her more than silence. Vivian felt her chest tighten with something tender and painful. Robert opened his eyes again, meeting her gaze straight on. And because Ethan reminded me of myself at that age, Vivian's breath trembled. That lonely? That unprotected, he corrected softly. Her heart gave a quiet, painful twist. Camilla? Vivian asked, though the name tasted bitter. Robert's jaw clenched. She's not his mother, and she's not anything to me. She's part of a board that wants leverage, and she loves attention more than truth. Vivian felt a wave of relief, stronger than she wanted to admit. Robert stepped closer, his voice growing softer. I didn't tell you everything because I didn't want to bring chaos into your life. You've already survived enough of that. She blinked. How would you know that? His eyes gentled. Because I've watched you. Every time something shifts around you, you brace yourself like someone who's had to rebuild alone. Vivian looked down. His fingers grazed her chin, encouraging her to lift her face. She resisted, then slowly met his gaze. You don't have to be strong with me, he whispered. Tears threatened. She pressed her lips together, determined not to let them fall. You don't know me well enough to say that, she said. I know enough, he murmured. I know your silence is louder than most people's shouting. I know your presence calms storms. I know Ethan trusts you already. And I know that you— His voice softened to something dangerously tender. You make me want to be better. Vivian's breath shattered in her lungs. The music drifted from inside, soft piano notes blending with the ocean breeze. The lanterns flickered above them, casting warm light across Robert's face. Vivian felt the pull between them like a tide, inevitable, dangerous, irresistible. Robert, she whispered, you can't say things like that to me tonight, not after everything that happened. His voice dropped. Especially after everything that happened. That's exactly why I need to say them. Her chest trembled. This isn't logical. No, Robert said, stepping even closer, close enough that she felt the warmth of him through her dress. It's not. He raised a hand again, slowly, giving her space to reject him. When she didn't move, his fingertips brushed the side of her arm. Just a whisper of touch, but it ignited something inside her. Vivian closed her eyes. Look at me, he whispered. She did, and his eyes, dark, conflicted, yearning, held her completely. You're the only thing tonight that feels real, he said. Vivian swallowed hard. You're overwhelmed. No, Robert said firmly. I'm clear. The wind lifted a stray curl of her hair, brushing it across her cheek. Robert reached out gently, softly tucking it behind her ear. His fingers lingered just long enough to make her breath stop. Vivian felt herself leaning toward him, barely instinctively, as if her body had made the decision without permission. Robert inhaled sharply at the movement. Their faces were inches apart. The world held its breath. Then a sudden burst of laughter from inside broke the fragile moment. The noise jolted Vivian back into herself. She stepped away, breath shaking. I can't, she murmured. Not like this, not tonight. Robert's expression flickered with pain, but not anger. Never anger. Only longing and frustration and something heartbreakingly gentle. I won't push you, he said, but I won't lie about what I feel. Vivian shook her head, trying to settle her racing pulse. Everything is too complicated, too public, too unclear. I'll make it clear, Robert said softly. How? Vivian demanded in a whisper, the ocean wind carrying the desperation in her voice. How can this possibly work when your life is this? Robert stepped closer again, not touching her, but surrounding her with quiet certainty. Because you're the only part of my life that doesn't feel like a performance, he said, and that matters more than the chaos. Vivian looked away, her heart pounding painfully. You should go back inside. Robert hesitated, searching her face for something, permission maybe, or forgiveness. Will you be here when I return? He asked quietly. She could have lied. She could have said she needed to leave, needed to breathe, needed space, but when she spoke, her heart overruled her caution. "Yes," she whispered, "I'll be here." Relief broke across his features, softening every line of tension. "Thank you," he murmured. Robert stepped back slowly, reluctantly. He gave her one last look, searing, tender, unguarded, then turned and walked toward the glowing entrance of the villa. Vivian wrapped her arms around herself as the night breeze brushed against her skin. She exhaled deeply, her heart heavy and full at the same time. She had promised to stay. She didn't know what would come next, but for the first time, the truth terrified her and thrilled her in equal measure, because she was no longer afraid of Robert Sinclair. She was afraid of what she was becoming because of him, and the night, beautiful, trembling, electric, felt like the beginning of a storm neither of them could outrun. Vivian stood alone on the terrace, the soft ocean breeze brushing gently against her skin, carrying the faint scent of orchids and salt. The lanterns flickered above her, their warm glow trembling like uncertain hope. The night had deepened, turning the sky into a velvet canvas scattered with shy stars. Yet the beauty around her only made the ache in her chest sharper. Robert had walked back inside moments ago, swallowed by cameras, board members, and the polished world he carried like armor. And she remained outside, suspended in a silence too heavy, too intimate, too full of everything neither of them dared to say. She wrapped her arms around herself, steadying the tremor she felt, not from the wind, but from the weight of emotions she had tried for hours to contain. Her heart beat in a rhythm she didn't trust, one she feared might break her if she surrendered to it. Then she heard it. Soft footsteps returning. Vivian's breath caught, hope and fear tangling painfully in her chest. Before she could turn, a familiar quiet voice slipped through the darkness. "Still here," Robert murmured. Vivian closed her eyes for a moment, gathering courage. When she faced him, she found him standing only a few steps away. No spotlight, no audience, no scripted presentation. Just Robert, disheveled from the evening's chaos, eyes heavy with the weight of things he couldn't show the world. And he was looking at her as if she were the only calm he'd known all night. Vivian steadied her voice. "You're supposed to be with your guests." His gaze softened, deepening with something almost raw. "I needed to be with you." Her breath faltered. "Robert." He took a slow step closer, the moonlight tracing the sharp lines of his jaw, catching in his dark hair. "You said you'd stay. I needed to make sure you meant it." "I'm here," she whispered. Relief flickered across his face, a softness so rare, so unguarded, that Vivian felt it like a hand around her heart. For a moment, neither spoke. The night filled the space between them with its warmth and quiet. Robert finally exhaled, gaze drifting toward the ocean. "Everything tonight felt like a performance. All of it, except when I was with you." Vivian swallowed. "I don't know how to stand beside you in the middle of all this, not when I don't understand what's happening behind closed doors." Robert's head lowered for a moment, the tension in his shoulders visible even in the dim light. "There are things I'm still trying to solve, things I didn't want touching you. You're still not telling me everything." "No," he whispered. "I'm not." "Why?" she asked softly. He looked directly at her then, eyes full of conflict, longing, and a fear he wasn't used to admitting. "Because once I tell you," he murmured, "I won't be able to pretend anymore. And pretending has been my shield for a long time." Vivian's chest tightened. "You don't need shields with me." Robert stepped closer still, so close that she felt the warmth radiating from him. "You say that," he said softly, "but you don't know what comes with me." "I know what you show the world," Vivian replied gently, "but what you've shown me tonight, that wasn't a billionaire or a symbol. That was a man trying to do the right thing, a man exhausted, a man who cares deeply." Robert closed the distance by another inch, his breath mingling with hers. "And what do I look like to you right now?" Vivian didn't hesitate. "Human." The word broke something in him. He looked at her with a vulnerability that made her heart ache. like he was holding himself together with threads thinner than silk. The lantern light reflected softly in his eyes, revealing an intensity that made her feel seen, truly seen. "Vivian," he whispered, voice cracking slightly, "I don't know how to be near you without wanting more." She felt her pulse race at the honesty in his words. Maybe wanting isn't the problem. His hand lifted, slowly, carefully, until his fingertips brushed her arm. The contact was barely there, but enough to steal her breath. His touch was warm, reverent, trembling with restraint. Vivian exhaled shakily, her voice a soft confession. "You can't look at me like that." "Like what?" he breathed. "Like I'm something gentle you're afraid to break." His eyes darkened. "That's exactly how I feel." Vivian's resolve trembled. Everything in her wanted to lean into him, to let the unspoken words between them spill into the night. But she forced air into her lungs. "What happens to Ethan?" she whispered. "What about Camilla?" He shook his head instantly. "Camilla has no claim on me. And Ethan," his voice softened with a tenderness that struck deep, "Ethan deserves stability. I want to give him that." Vivian nodded slowly, her heart warming at the sincerity in his tone. "He trusts you." Robert's gaze drifted toward the villa for a moment. "He trusts you, too." The statement shocked her more than she expected. "He barely knows me." "He knows enough," Robert murmured. "He knew you'd stay when he needed you." Vivian's breath caught. Robert stepped close enough that the fabric of his shirt brushed the sleeve of her dress. "And so did I." The confession hung between them like a fragile, glowing truth. Vivian looked down at their proximity, her pulse trembling. "Robert, you're making this harder. What if I told you I'm tired of making everything easy?" he asked, voice low and intimate. "What if I told you I want something real, something that isn't staged or negotiated or expected of me?" Vivian felt her heart clench painfully. "Then I'd ask if you're sure you're not confusing comfort with connection." He shook his head. "There's nothing comfortable about how I feel right now." Vivian's breath faltered again. "What do you feel?" Robert's eyes searched hers, as if looking for permission. "I feel pulled," he whispered. "Pulled toward you like a tide I can't fight." Vivian's vision softened, blurring at the edges with emotion. She didn't move away. She didn't breathe. She felt him lean closer, so close his forehead nearly touched hers. Then he stopped, as if on the edge of something dangerous. "I don't want to complicate your life," Robert murmured. "You already have," Vivian whispered back. His breath caught at her honesty. Vivian closed her eyes, her heart pounding like a quiet storm. "Robert." "Yes," he whispered, his voice trembling. "I'm scared." He gently touched her chin, lifting it until she met his eyes again. His hand was warm, steady, grounding her in the moment. "So am I," he admitted. "And that's how I know this matters." Vivian inhaled shakily. She felt the world narrowing to just him, the ocean, the lights, the distant sounds of the party fading into insignificance. Robert's thumb brushed the side of her jaw with heartbreaking tenderness. "Tell me I'm not imagining this." Vivian's voice barely formed the words. "You're not." Emotion flooded his expression. Relief, longing, disbelief. He leaned closer, breath trembling against her cheek, stopping a breath away from her lips, not kissing her, just letting the tension between them deepen into something almost unbearable. Vivian felt tears sting her eyes, overwhelmed by how much she wanted to close the distance, how much she feared the consequences. "Robert," she whispered, "if we cross this line, there's no going back." "I know," he breathed, "and for the first time in years, I don't want to go back." Her heart squeezed painfully. She lifted her hand slowly and rested it against his chest, feeling the steady beat beneath her palm. His breath hitched at the contact, his eyes darkening with emotion. "Then say it," she murmured. "Say what you want." His voice was barely a whisper. "You." Her breath caught like a soft gasp. He didn't kiss her. He didn't pull her close. He simply held her gaze, letting the truth settle in the air between them like something sacred. Vivian felt her knees weaken. She drew in a trembling breath. "Robert, but she couldn't finish. Not because she didn't know the answer, but because the answer terrified her more than anything. A distant shout from inside the villa broke the moment, staff calling for Robert's attention again, urgency in their tone. Robert closed his eyes briefly, frustration pulling at the corners of his mouth. "I have to go." Vivian stepped back an inch, though her hand lingered against his chest for one final heartbeat before falling away. "I know," she whispered. Robert reached for her hand, but stopped himself just before touching her again, restraint trembling in his fingers. "Stay, please." "I'll be here," Vivian said softly. "I'm not running." Relief softened his features. "I'll come back." Vivian nodded. Robert turned and walked toward the villa slowly, as if each step away from her cost him effort. When he disappeared through the doorway, the night felt strangely hollow. Vivian exhaled shakily. Her heart pulsed with a tender ache. The night air wrapped around her like a fragile embrace as she leaned against the railing, looking out at the dark, shimmering ocean. She was falling, and she knew it. The question, the fear, was whether Robert Sinclair would fall with her, or whether she would be left catching herself alone. But tonight, the only thing she knew with certainty was this: her heart was no longer her own. Vivian remained on the terrace long after Robert vanished inside the villa, swallowed once again by the responsibilities, promises and pressures of his carefully curated world. The night had grown deeper, the sky turning a darker shade of indigo. The ocean murmured in steady, consoling waves, its rhythm almost soothing, almost enough to calm the tremor inside her. Almost. Vivian pressed her palms against the cool railing, grounding herself. The velvet breeze brushed her skin, lifting strands of her hair, making the lantern light dance in soft golden flickers around her. Yet she felt suspended between breaths, as if the entire evening were holding her hostage in a moment between truth and fear. Her heart was too loud, her pulse too quick. The memory of Robert's voice whispering that he felt pulled toward her still clung to her like invisible hands. She didn't know how long she stood there, minutes, perhaps longer, before someone cleared their throat softly behind her. She turned. It was Carter. His posture was as composed as ever, hands neatly behind his back, but his expression held a rare softness. It was the first time she had seen anything in his eyes other than discipline. "Ms. Reed," he said quietly, "Mr. Sinclair asked me to check on you." Vivian's throat tightened. "I'm fine." Carter's gaze flicked briefly toward the doorway. He was concerned. She looked down at the tiles beneath her heels. "He has enough to worry about." "That doesn't stop him," Carter murmured. Vivian's breath hitched. She didn't know how to respond. Carter hesitated for a long moment before speaking again, carefully, as though choosing every word with precision. "For what it's worth," he said softly, "I've worked with Mr. Sinclair for many years. I've seen him handle pressure, crisis, and corporate warfare. He doesn't shake easily." He paused. "Tonight, the only time I saw him truly unsettled was when you walked away." Vivian's lips parted, surprise stealing her breath. "Carter!" He gave a small nod of respect, not intrusion, then stepped back. "He'll come as soon as he can." And with that, he disappeared into the villa, leaving her with a heart that now beat with an even more dangerous hope. Vivian exhaled shakily, gripping the railing again. She didn't want to fall for illusions, especially not illusions with dark hair, intense eyes, and a heart buried under layers of secrecy and responsibility. But how could she fight something that felt so impossibly real? Vivian. Her breath stopped. Robert stood in the doorway again, but this time he looked different. His suit jacket was off, his tie gone, the top of his shirt slightly undone. His hair was no longer perfectly styled, and his expression, rich with emotion, exhaustion, and something far more intimate, softened the sharp angles of his face. He walked toward her slowly, as if afraid to break the quiet moment that existed only between them. "I'm sorry," he said. Vivian looked at him, caught between wanting to run and wanting to step straight into his arms. "For what?" "For everything," Robert murmured. "For tonight. for how chaotic it's been, for the weight I've placed on you without explaining enough." Vivian bit her lip gently, steadying her voice. "I didn't come here for clarity about your world. I came because you asked." Robert stopped just inches from her, the ocean breeze weaving between them. "I know, and that means more to me than you realize." They stood in silence, letting the music from inside drift through the open terrace doors. Soft strings, elegant chords, a melody that felt too tender for the tension between them. Vivian turned her gaze toward the water. Ethan looked overwhelmed. Robert nodded slowly. He was. He hates attention. But Camilla insisted on the presentation. "And the board liked the optics." Vivian's brows knit. "The board?" Robert's jaw tightened. "They see Ethan as an opportunity, a way to soften my image, to make me appear more human." "That's cruel," Vivian whispered. He looked down. "That's business." Vivian felt a surge of something fierce, protectiveness, indignation, and something deeply tender. Ethan isn't a tool. He's a child. Robert's eyes softened. "I know. That's why I want him with me. Safe from all of that." "And Camilla," Vivian asked, voice quiet but edged, "where does she fit into all of this?" "She doesn't," Robert said instantly. "Not in any way that matters." Vivian felt her heart skip. Robert stepped closer, his voice lowering to something intimate, something vulnerable. "But you matter." Her breath caught. "Robert, you matter," he repeated, as if afraid she hadn't heard it the first time. Vivian looked down, her hands tightening on the railing. "You barely know me." "I know enough," he whispered, "enough to feel what I feel." Vivian swallowed, willing her voice to stay steady. "What do you feel?" He didn't hesitate. "Drawn to you," he said softly. "At peace with you. More honest with you in a few days than I've been with anyone in years." Vivian closed her eyes. Robert's hand lifted again, hesitant, slow, reverent, like he was touching something sacred. His fingertips brushed her arm, trailing warmth along her skin. "You make me want to be less alone," he murmured. Vivian's breath trembled. "I don't want to drown in your world." He moved closer, the space between them vanishing. "I won't let you drown," he whispered. "Not ever. Don't promise things you can't protect," she murmured. His chest rose with a slow, deliberate breath. You are the one thing I intend to protect." Vivian opened her eyes, and when she met his gaze, everything inside her shifted. His eyes were full of sincerity, longing, and a tenderness he didn't show anyone else. She felt something in her break open, something fragile, carefully guarded for years. "Robert," she breathed, "I don't know how to do this." "Then let me learn with you," he whispered. The night wind brushed gently between them, carrying the scent of the ocean, the glow of the lanterns painting their silhouettes in warm gold. Vivian felt her heart tipping toward him, pulled by a force she couldn't resist. "Why me?" she asked softly. "Out of everyone in that room tonight?" "Because you see me," Robert answered simply. "Not the image, not the title, not the myth they created. You see the man under all of it." Vivian trembled. "And that scares you?" "Yes," he confessed, "and it also makes me feel alive." He reached for her hand, slowly, giving her every chance to step away. When his fingers brushed hers, Vivian felt her breath break. Warmth spread through her like light. He intertwined their fingers gently, his thumb brushing her knuckles in soft, lingering strokes. The touch was intimate, tender, and charged with all the words they hadn't spoken. Vivian felt her heart pulse against her ribs. "Say something," he whispered. "Anything." She lifted her gaze. "I'm falling," she whispered. Robert's exhale shuddered out of him. "So am I." Her knees weakened slightly, and Robert stepped closer instinctively, steadying her without pulling her in. His body radiated warmth, his presence wrapping around her like a quiet embrace she hadn't known she needed. The music inside shifted into a slow, romantic melody, soft strings and warm piano chords drifting out onto the terrace. Robert looked toward the villa, then back at her. "Dance with me," he said softly. Vivian's breath caught. "Here?" He nodded. "Here, where it's just us." Her heart fluttered. He released her hand only to offer it again, palm up, inviting, gentle. Vivian placed her hand in his. He stepped closer, slipping his other hand lightly onto her waist, barely touching, respectful, trembling with restraint. Vivian rested her free hand on his shoulder, feeling the solid warmth beneath the softened fabric of his shirt. They began to sway, slow, unhurried, as if time itself had paused to watch them. The ocean whispered below, the lanterns glowed softly, and the world shrank to the steady rhythm of their breaths. Vivian felt her forehead almost brush his cheek as they moved. His thumb traced slow circles on her waist through the fabric of her dress. Her fingers tightened gently on his shoulder. Their bodies kept a respectful distance, yet everything between them felt unbearably intimate. "Vivian," Robert murmured into the space between them. "Yes," she breathed. "I haven't felt this close to someone in a long time." She closed her eyes, letting the moment wrap around her. "Me neither." He tightened his hold, not pulling her in, just holding her more securely, as if anchoring himself to something real. Vivian felt warmth rise in her throat. Robert lowered his head slightly, his lips brushing the air near her hairline, not touching, just close enough to make her shiver. "You make me want to believe in second chances," he whispered. Her breath trembled. "And you make me afraid to hope." Their steps slowed even more, until they were barely moving, swaying gently in the warm Miami breeze, held together by the quietest gravity. Robert pulled back just enough to look into her eyes. "Vivian," he whispered, voice thick with emotion, "tell me there's a chance for us." She felt her heart answer before her lips did. "There could be," she whispered, "if we're both brave enough." His hand cupped her cheek, then, slowly, reverently, his thumb brushing her skin with a tenderness that made tears threaten to fall. "I'll be brave," he murmured, "for you." Vivian's lips parted on a soft, trembling breath, and for a fleeting, fragile moment, the world around them held its breath. The ocean, the music, the lights, it all felt like a blessing cast over them. Two hearts, once guarded, now trembling open in the quiet glow of a night they would never forget. Vivian didn't know how long she and Robert swayed together on the terrace, caught between music, moonlight, and a truth neither dared to break. Their bodies never fully touched, yet her skin hummed everywhere his hands came close. His breath warmed her cheek, his thumb brushed soft circles along her palm, and every small movement felt impossibly intimate. The world beyond the pool of lantern light no longer existed, but moments, especially the fragile ones, never last forever. The music shifted inside, faster now, livelier. Voices rose in excitement, steps echoed across marble, and the glow spilling from the villa brightened with sudden movement. Robert stilled. Vivian opened her eyes slowly, unwilling to leave the cocoon of quiet intimacy, but Robert's expression had changed. His posture tightened, his jaw clenched subtly, and an invisible wall rose behind his gaze. Something was wrong. He didn't speak. Instead, he lifted her hand to his lips, not kissing it, but pressing it lightly against his cheek. The gesture was tender, desperate, almost apologetic. "Stay here," he whispered. Her heart tightened. "Robert, what's happening?" He hesitated for a long, silent moment, then brushed his thumb once more across her knuckles. "I'll be right back." Before she could protest, before she could anchor herself to the warmth of him again, Robert released her hand and stepped away, his presence retreating into the glow of the villa like a man walking back into a storm. Vivian took a shaky breath. The terrace suddenly felt too large, too quiet, too full of the echo of their almost confession. She wrapped her arms around herself again, pressing her palms lightly against her forearms. The night breeze had grown cooler. From inside, voices rose, sharper this time, urgent. Vivian strained to listen but couldn't make out the words. Her heartbeat quickened. She turned toward the glass doors. Inside, she spotted flashes of movement, Carter striding quickly down the hallway, Celeste gesturing with clipped urgency, and staff members whispering anxiously. Guests began drifting in clusters, curious but cautious. Something disrupted the carefully curated elegance of the night. Vivian's pulse raced. She looked for Robert. Then she saw him. He stood in the center of the great room, shoulders squared, jaw locked, eyes dark with something she had not seen in him before. Fear, not panic, never panic, but a cold, quiet dread that drained the color from his usually steady composure. Vivian stepped forward instinctively. Robert's gaze snapped toward the doors the moment she approached. When he saw her move toward him, he shook his head once. Quick, almost imperceptible. A warning. Her steps faltered. Celeste reached Robert, whispering sharply, "I told you this might happen. You should have listened." "Not here," Robert said, voice low and hard. "Not now." "That's exactly the problem," Celeste hissed. "Now is the worst possible." "Enough," Robert snapped softly. Vivian had never heard that tone from him, controlled, quiet, but edged with steel. Carter appeared beside him, slipping a discreet folder into his hand. "Sir, we need a private moment. The sooner the better." Robert inhaled deeply, then turned toward the terrace again. His gaze found Vivian with startling precision. He didn't speak, he didn't gesture, but the look he gave her was unmistakable. He needed her. Vivian walked toward him, her heels clicking softly on the polished floor, the music and murmurs fading as she approached. The tension in the air wrapped around her like an invisible fog. When she reached him, Robert exhaled slowly, as if her presence alone steadied him. "Come with me," he whispered. Vivian nodded. They slipped into a smaller lounge room adjacent to the terrace. Quiet, dimly lit, with floor-to-ceiling windows framing the ocean like a frozen painting. Carter remained by the door, standing guard. Robert closed the distance between himself and Vivian with slow, deliberate steps, his shoulders tight with tension. She touched his arm gently. "Tell me." Robert's voice came out rough, strained. There was a leak. Vivian's chest constricted. "About Ethan?" He shook his head. "About us?" Her breath caught. "Us?" "Yes." He dragged a hand through his hair, a gesture more vulnerable than anything he had shown all evening. "Pictures. Rumors. Someone sent them to the board." Vivian felt heat and cold crash through her simultaneously. "What kind of pictures?" "From tonight. From earlier. Us alone on the terrace. The way I looked at you. The way you—" His voice broke off as his gaze dropped to her lips for one trembling second. "They're calling it a scandal." Vivian stepped back in shock. "A scandal? We didn't do anything." "They don't care," Robert whispered. "They never care." Vivian's pulse hammered painfully. "What does this mean? For you? For Ethan?" He closed his eyes for a moment, anguish flickering across his face. "They'll use this to question my judgment, to claim I'm distracted. They might try to block the guardianship or force Ethan into a foster situation." His voice dropped to a softer, agonizing whisper. "I can't let that happen." Vivian felt the room tilt. "Robert!" He opened his eyes again, and the emotion there nearly undid her. "I need you to be honest with me," he said softly. "Is this something real for you? Or am I imagining it?" Vivian's breath trembled. "It's real." Robert's shoulders sagged with relief, but his expression only grew more tortured. "Then I'm sorry." Her stomach dropped. "Why?" He took her hands, both of them, holding them with a tenderness laced with desperation. "Because wanting you puts him at risk, and I can't, will not, choose my heart over a child who needs me." The words pierced her. Vivian felt something inside her crack, not from rejection, but from the sheer emotion in his voice. "I'm not asking you to choose," she whispered. "I would never, but I am," Robert said, voice thick with pain. "Because every moment I allow myself to feel this, I know I'm making things harder for you." Vivian's eyes softened. "You're not." He looked away, jaw clenching. "I don't know another way to protect you, or him." Vivian felt her throat tighten. "Then let me decide what risk I'm willing to take." He turned back to her, eyes dark and intense. "Vivian, I'm falling for you." Her breath caught, her heart slamming into her ribs. He lifted her hands to his chest, pressing them over his heartbeat. "But if the world finds out, they will try to destroy you, not me. You." Vivian's voice came out barely above a whisper. "I'm not afraid of them." "I am," he whispered. "I'm terrified for you." She felt tears sting her eyes. He stepped closer, foreheads nearly touching, breath mingling with hers. "Tell me I should walk away from you tonight. Tell me that's the right thing." Vivian stared at him through trembling breath. "I won't," she whispered, "because it wouldn't be the truth." A shuddered exhale left his lips. Their closeness deepened, the warmth of him, the scent of cedar on his skin, the trembling restraint in his posture. His thumb stroked the back of her hand, slow and deliberate. "Vivian," he whispered, A knock interrupted them. Carter leaned inside the room. "Sir, we have a situation. Camilla has gathered several board members. They're demanding a statement about Ms. Reed." Vivian's blood went cold. Robert's expression darkened, anger, fear, and fierce protectiveness blending into one. He turned to Vivian, cupping her cheek with a hand that trembled with restraint. "Stay here." Her voice shook. "Robert, please," he murmured. "Let me fight this first." Vivian nodded. He brushed his thumb across her cheek, tender, lingering, then stepped away, his eyes holding hers until the very last second before he forced himself to turn and leave. The moment the door shut, Vivian felt her strength waver. Her hands shook, her breath faltered. She wrapped her arms around herself again, grounding herself in the soft hum of distant music and the steady rhythm of the ocean outside. The room felt too quiet, too full of the echoes of everything Robert had confessed. She crossed to the window, leaning her forehead against the cool glass, trying to steady the storm within her. Minutes passed, then more. Finally, the soft click of the door gently tore her from her thoughts. She turned sharply and froze. Robert stood in the doorway. His tie was gone, his shirt slightly rumpled, his expression full of exhaustion, but his eyes, they held something fierce and victorious. Vivian's breath trembled. What happened? He closed the door quietly, then stepped toward her slowly, as if approaching something precious. "I told them the truth," Robert murmured. Her heart raced. "What truth?" "That you're not a scandal." He stepped closer. "You're not a distraction." Another step. "You're not a liability." His voice softened into something unbearably tender. "You are someone I care about, deeply, and I won't let them use you as leverage." Vivian felt her breath leave her. She whispered, "Robert." He reached her then. Standing so close she could feel the warmth of him, smell the quiet sweetness of citrus and cedar lingering against his skin. He lifted a hand and touched her cheek, soft, reverent, as if memorizing the shape of her. "I chose honesty tonight," he whispered. Her voice trembled. "And what did it cost you?" "Everything," he murmured. "And nothing, because losing myself in silence would be worse." Vivian felt tears gather again, not from fear this time, but from the overwhelming tenderness in his voice. Robert lowered his forehead to hers, eyes closing, breath shaky. "I'm still falling," he whispered. Vivian's tears slipped softly down her cheek. "So am I." Robert lifted her hand to his chest again, pressing it over his heartbeat, a steady, racing rhythm that matched her own. "Then fall with me," he murmured. "Even if the world makes it difficult, even if tonight complicates everything." Vivian felt her heart melt into his words. She leaned into him, not to kiss, not to claim, but to rest her forehead fully against his, sharing the quietest, purest kind of intimacy. "I'm not leaving," she whispered. His exhale trembled with relief. Outside, the ocean whispered its endless lullaby. Inside the quiet room, two hearts finally admitted what they could no longer hide. And the night, deep, dangerous, beautiful, wrapped itself gently around them. The quiet room still held the warmth of their confession, as if the air itself had memorized the way Robert's hands had framed Vivian's face and the way her voice had trembled when she said she was not leaving. Outside the glass, the ocean kept its steady rhythm, indifferent to money, gossip, and the fragile miracle of two guarded hearts finally admitting the truth. Inside, time moved again. A muted knock came from the hallway, careful and restrained, as if even the villa's staff feared disturbing what had formed between them. Carter's voice followed, low but urgent. "Sir, we need you." Robert's shoulders tightened. Vivian felt it immediately, the way tension returned to him like a suit he didn't want to wear, but had been trained to button up in seconds. Robert didn't pull away from her. He simply exhaled, slow and deliberate, his forehead still resting against hers for one last heartbeat. "I meant what I said," he murmured. Vivian's lips parted slightly, breath unsteady. "So did I." Robert's hand slid down to hold hers, his fingers lacing with hers as if anchoring himself to something real, before stepping back into the storm. He turned toward the door, but not before looking at her with a quiet intensity that made her chest ache. "Stay close," he said. It wasn't an order, it was a plea. Vivian nodded once. "I'm right here." When Robert opened the door, Carter stood with his usual composed posture, but the tightness around his eyes gave him away. Something outside had shifted, something had escalated. Robert's voice was calm. "What is it?" Carter handed him a phone. "The tabloids. They're already calling. Someone sent the images to multiple outlets, not just the board." Vivian's blood went cold. Robert glanced at the screen, jaw hardening. A headline draft flashed across the display. "Dubai Maharaja's new mystery woman, employee or secret lover." Vivian's stomach tightened like a fist. The nickname Dubai Maharaja always sounded ridiculous in interviews and glossy magazines, a manufactured myth meant to make Robert look untouchable. But tonight, it felt like a weapon. A mask the world loved so much that it would tear apart anyone who dared to look at the man beneath it. Robert lowered the phone slowly. His expression didn't crack, but his eyes turned darker, more resolved. "They won't get to write this story," he said. Vivian stepped forward, heart pounding. "Robert!" He turned to her, and in his gaze there was a fierce tenderness, the kind that didn't soften his strength, only gave it purpose. "I'm going to end this," he murmured, "and I'm going to end it the right way." Carter shifted slightly, eyes flicking to Vivian with respect. "Ma'am, there's more." Robert's gaze sharpened. "Go on." Carter held out the discreet folder he'd carried earlier. "We pulled security footage. The photos didn't come from a guest. They came from someone who had access." Vivian's breath caught. "Access to the terrace?" Carter nodded once. "A temporary vendor, not on your approved list. The entry was authorized by Camilla Vale." The name hit the room like a slap. Vivian's pulse surged. "She did this!" Robert's jaw tightened. He looked away for a moment, as if the anger in him needed somewhere to go that wasn't Vivian's face. Carter continued, voice measured. "The vendor was paid through a shell account linked to a consulting firm Camilla controls." A long silence followed. Even the ocean seemed quieter. Vivian stared at Robert, searching his face. She expected rage. She expected him to harden fully into the billionaire everyone feared. Instead, she saw pain first, because betrayal hurts most when it comes from the side you once trusted to stand with you. Robert exhaled, slow and controlled. "Get my attorney. Now." Carter nodded and moved away. Vivian stepped closer, voice trembling but steady. Why would she do this? Robert's eyes returned to hers. "Leverage," he said quietly, "to control the guardianship, to control me." Vivian's throat tightened. "And Ethan." Robert's expression softened at the boy's name. "Especially Ethan." The thought made Vivian's chest ache. She pictured Ethan's nervous hands, the way he had asked if she could stay, the way his eyes had looked too old for his age. Vivian didn't hesitate. "Where is he?" Robert's gaze flicked toward the hallway. Carter moved him to the West Wing with Mrs. Delgado. No cameras, no guests. Vivian nodded. Good. Robert's hand lifted, brushing her hair back with a tenderness that felt almost out of place in the middle of crisis. But Vivian understood it. When the world tried to turn her into a scandal, Robert was touching her as if to remind her she was human. "You don't have to stand in this fire with me," he said softly. Vivian's eyes stung. "Yes, I do." His gaze tightened, a mixture of pride and worry. "Vivian." She stepped closer until she could feel his warmth. "If they want a story, we give them one they can't twist. We give them the truth." Robert's breath hitched. "The truth will hurt you." Vivian lifted her chin. "I've survived worse than headlines." For a moment, Robert just looked at her, like he was memorizing the courage on her face, like he was realizing he hadn't just fallen for a woman. He had fallen for someone who would not break easily. Carter returned. "Attorney is on speaker." Robert took the phone, voice sharp and precise. "File for an emergency injunction against publication of any unauthorized images taken on my property, and start a restraining order against Camilla Vale. Tonight." A voice crackled through the speaker. "Understood. Also, your guardianship petition. We can file for emergency temporary guardianship immediately if we have documentation." Robert's jaw flexed. "We do." Vivian's brows knit. "We do." Robert looked at her and something softened again. "Ethan's mother left a letter, a notarized one, naming me as his first choice." Vivian's throat tightened. "You never told me." "I didn't want you carrying that weight," Robert murmured. Vivian exhaled slowly. "Then use it. Protect him." Robert spoke into the phone. "File it. Tonight." The attorney's voice remained calm. "I'll need Ethan's location for the court officer and Mr. Sinclair, there's another complication. With the scandal spreading, the court may request a brief statement to assess stability." Robert's gaze flicked to Vivian, then back to the phone. "Then we'll give them one." He ended the call and stood still for a moment, as if listening to the storm forming beyond the villa's walls. Vivian watched him closely. "You're going to speak publicly?" Robert nodded once. "Before they speak for me." Vivian's pulse quickened. "And you want me there?" His gaze held hers. "Yes." The truth of it settled between them, heavy, frightening, and strangely clean. Vivian's voice softened. "Then I'll stand beside you, not behind you." Robert's eyes flickered, relief and emotion rising. He stepped closer, cupping her cheek gently. "I don't deserve you," he whispered. Vivian's breath trembled. "Stop saying that. Start choosing better." A faint, pained smile touched his mouth. "I am." Carter appeared again, expression focused. "Sir, press gathered outside the gate. They got tipped." Robert's jaw set. "Of course they did." Vivian's stomach tightened. "This is moving fast." Robert's gaze stayed on her. "So will we." They moved through the villa with controlled urgency. The hallways that had felt glamorous earlier now felt like corridors in a storm shelter. Quiet, tense, full of people trying not to panic. Staff whispered. Phones buzzed. Celeste appeared near the staircase, face pale but composed. "Robert," she said quickly, "you can't go out there without a strategy. If you say the wrong thing—" Robert's voice was calm, but it cut through her like steel. "The strategy is truth." Celeste's eyes flicked to Vivian, something sharp flashing briefly. Fear, resentment, maybe even guilt. Vivian didn't flinch. Celeste swallowed. "Camilla is claiming you're being manipulated." Robert's gaze hardened. "Camilla is the one who manipulates." Celeste's lips parted as if to argue, then she stopped. For the first time, Vivian saw something like defeat in her. "Fine," Celeste whispered. "Then let me help you control the narrative. Let me—" Robert lifted a hand. "No." The single word landed with finality. Vivian felt the shift. A line drawn, a boundary set. Robert looked at Celeste, voice quieter now but no less firm. "You work for me, not the board, not Camilla. If you're with me, you're with truth. If you're not, step aside." Celeste's throat bobbed. Then she nodded once. "I'm with you." Robert didn't smile. He simply moved forward. They reached the west wing doorway, and Vivian paused when she saw Ethan sitting on a couch with Mrs. Delgado. The boy's small hands twisted the hem of his shirt. His eyes lifted to Robert, searching for reassurance. Robert knelt in front of him instantly, the billionaire gone, replaced by a man with a child's trust in his hands. "Hey," Robert said gently, "you're safe." Ethan's voice was small. "Are they mad at me?" Vivian's heart shattered a little. Robert's eyes softened. "No, no one is mad at you. Adults are just loud when they're scared." Ethan looked down. "Camilla said I have to smile for pictures." Robert's jaw tightened. He kept his voice tender. "Camilla doesn't get to tell you what to do anymore." Ethan's eyes widened. "Really, really," Robert whispered. He glanced at Vivian, and his gaze softened further. "And Vivian is here." Ethan turned toward her, relief flooding his face like sunrise. "You stayed." Vivian stepped closer, crouching beside him. "I promised." Ethan's shoulders loosened. He hesitated, then reached for her hand again. Vivian took it gently, feeling the trust in that small grip like something sacred. Robert looked at Ethan with quiet resolve. "I'm going to talk to some people outside. You stay here with Mrs. Delgado. No cameras, no strangers. If you feel scared, you tell her. Or you tell Vivian if she's here." Ethan nodded quickly. Vivian squeezed his hand softly. "We're not letting anyone take you away." Ethan's lip trembled, but he tried to be brave. "Okay." Robert stood slowly, then looked at Vivian, voice low. "Are you sure?" Vivian didn't hesitate. "Yes." Robert's breath caught. He reached for her hand, lacing his fingers with hers. He didn't pull her closer, but the contact felt like a vow. Together, they walked toward the main entrance. Outside the gate, camera flashes erupted like lightning. Reporters called his nickname with hungry voices. "Dubai Maharaja! Robert! Who is she?" Vivian's stomach clenched, but she kept her chin lifted. Robert paused before the gate, inhaling slowly. He glanced at Vivian, his eyes asking permission without words. Vivian squeezed his hand once. "Truth," she whispered. Robert nodded. Carter opened the gate enough to let them step into view, with security forming a discreet perimeter. The night air was thick with humidity, lenses, and judgment. Robert stepped forward, Vivian beside him. The flashes intensified. Robert raised a hand for silence. His voice carried, calm, controlled, unmistakably sincere. "My name is Robert Sinclair," he said. "Not a nickname, not a myth. Tonight some people tried to turn my life into a spectacle." He paused, gaze steady. "They will not." A hush fell. Robert continued. "This woman beside me is Vivian Reed. She is a professional who helped organize a private event on my property. She is not a scandal. She is not a plot. She is not an opportunity for your headlines." Vivian's heart pounded, but her spine stayed straight. Robert's gaze softened as he looked at her, and the tenderness in his eyes silenced more than any security guard could. "She is someone I respect," he said. "Someone I care about. And if you want to speak about my personal life, you will do it with the truth." Reporters murmured, startled by the directness. Robert's voice deepened. "My special guest tonight was Ethan, a child who deserves privacy, safety, and stability. I am pursuing legal guardianship of him. Anyone who attempts to use him for publicity will face legal action." A reporter shouted, "Is Camilla Vale involved?" Robert's jaw tightened. "Camilla Vale is being served with a restraining order. Evidence shows she authorized illegal surveillance on my property. That's the only involvement she has." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Vivian felt Robert's hand tighten around hers, not in fear, but in fierce steadiness. Robert's voice lowered, becoming more personal. "I've spent years letting the world decide what I am. Tonight, I'm deciding for myself." He turned slightly toward Vivian, his gaze intense and soft all at once. "And I'm deciding who matters." Vivian's breath caught. She didn't move. She didn't blink. Robert turned back to the cameras. That's all. He guided Vivian back through the gate, not rushing, not hiding, but walking with the quiet authority of a man who had finally stopped performing. Inside the villa again, the noise faded as the gate closed. The silence felt immense, like the aftermath of thunder. Vivian exhaled shakily, realizing her hands were trembling. Robert turned to her, eyes searching her face. "Are you okay?" Vivian's voice cracked softly. "I think I just walked into a hurricane with you." Robert's expression softened into something unbearably tender. "And you didn't let go?" Vivian swallowed hard. "Neither did you." Robert stepped closer, slowly, as if approaching something fragile. His fingertips brushed her cheek again, gentle, reverent. "I'm sorry the world is cruel," he whispered, "but I'm not sorry you're here." Vivian's eyes stung. "Robert?" His forehead lowered to hers, breath trembling. "I meant it. You matter, and I'm done letting anyone treat you like collateral." Vivian's hand rose to his chest, feeling his heartbeat, steady, strong, alive. Her voice was barely a whisper. "Then don't." Robert's breath shuddered, and in that moment, the restraint that had held them apart all night finally softened into something inevitable. He didn't rush. He didn't take. He leaned in slowly, giving her every chance to step away. Vivian didn't. Their lips met, brief, tender, trembling with everything they had held back. It wasn't hungry. It wasn't reckless. It was a promise spoken without words, a quiet surrender that made Vivian's knees weaken. Robert pulled back just enough to rest his forehead against hers again, eyes closed, breath unsteady. "I've wanted to do that since the first time you said no to me," he murmured. Vivian let out a shaky laugh through tears she refused to hide now. "That's a strange confession." Robert's mouth curved into a soft smile, the first truly free one she had seen. "You made me honest." Footsteps approached softly. Mrs. Delgado appeared in the hallway, her expression warm and protective. "Ethan is asking for you," she said gently, looking at both of them like she already understood more than they'd spoken. Vivian's heart softened. She glanced at Robert. "Let's go." Robert nodded, his hand finding hers again with natural ease. They returned to the west wing, where Ethan sat up straighter when he saw them. His eyes flicked between them, noticing the shift in their closeness, with the sharp intuition only children have. "Are they gone?" Ethan asked. Robert knelt again. "They're outside, and they'll stay outside." Ethan's shoulders relaxed. "Did you yell at them?" Robert huffed a small, quiet laugh. "Something like that." Ethan looked at Vivian. "You didn't leave." Vivian squeezed his hand gently. "I promised." Ethan hesitated, then asked the question that made Vivian's breath catch. "Can you come back tomorrow?" Vivian's eyes stung. She looked at Robert, and in his gaze she saw the same ache, the desire to protect, the fear of losing, the hope of building something stable out of chaos. Vivian answered softly, without hesitation. "Yes." Robert's breath released, trembling with relief. Ethan's small smile appeared again, shy but real. "Okay." Robert stood, still holding Vivian's hand. He looked down at her, voice low, intimate, meant only for her. "This is the part where my life gets harder," he whispered. Vivian's thumb brushed over his knuckles, steady and warm. "And truer." Robert's eyes softened. "Stay." It wasn't a plea anymore. It was a choice. Vivian stepped closer, resting her head lightly against his shoulder for one quiet heartbeat, letting herself feel the safety of him. "I'm here," she whispered, "and I'm not afraid of the truth." Robert's hand tightened around hers like a vow. Outside, the ocean kept whispering its endless song. Inside, under the same roof where secrets had tried to become scandals, something else took root. Quiet, brave, and undeniable. A love chosen openly, a child protected fiercely, and a man, once trapped inside a myth, finally learning how to live as himself. The Miami coastline looked different now, sleeker, quieter, softened by the passage of time and the wisdom that only life's storms could carve into stone. The Sinclair Foundation villa still stood, but the energy surrounding it had changed. The world had changed. and so had the people who once braced themselves against the paparazzi flashes that tried to shatter them. The evening sun dipped low, painting the ocean in shades of rose gold. A warm breeze carried the scent of salt and jasmine across the garden, where Robert Sinclair walked slowly toward the terrace that had once held the most fragile, dangerous, hopeful confession of his life. Tonight, the terrace was full of laughter, not loud laughter, the sweet kind, the kind that spilled from children with paint on their fingers and wild curls blowing in the wind. Vivian stood near the railing, the same railing where, years ago, she had held her breath as Robert nearly walked away from her. The years had been gentle with her. Her eyes were just as bright, but softer now, content in ways she hadn't known she was allowed to be. She wore a pale linen dress, and her hair, streaked lightly from time and sun, fell in loose waves down her back. At her feet, a little girl of 5 splashed her tiny hands in a bucket of watercolors, her bare feet tapping against the stone tiles. She looked like her mother, Vivian's delicate nose, her expressive brows, but she had Robert's deep-set eyes and the same tiny dimple on the left cheek that appeared only when she smiled too widely. "Emma," Vivian laughed softly, bending down to wipe a streak of blue paint from the child's cheek. "The paper is here, sweetheart. Not your face." Emma giggled, dipping her fingers again with no remorse whatsoever. "But my face wants to be pretty." Vivian kissed her forehead. "Your face is always pretty." From the doorway, Ethan, now 14, leaned against the frame, smiling at them with the confidence of a boy who had grown into a young man with love instead of fear. His shoulders were broader, his posture relaxed. He was no longer the child hiding behind politeness and pressure. He wore a simple t-shirt and khaki shorts, but his smile was unmistakably Sinclair. "Mom," Ethan called, "Emma stole my paintbrush again." Emma looked up at him defiantly. It needed a new home. Vivian stood, brushing her hands together. "Ethan, let her paint for a few more minutes. Your dad wants to talk to you." Emma pointed her blue-stained fingers at her older brother. "You can watch me paint if you want." Ethan rolled his eyes playfully. "I'll pass." Robert finally stepped onto the terrace, and for a moment, he simply watched them. Time had changed him too. He still carried an air of quiet power, but the weight in his shoulders had lifted. His smile came easier now. His eyes, still sharp, still haunted at times, held a warmth that hadn't been there the night they'd met. His hair carried a few more silver strands, which Vivian claimed made him look even more handsome. He didn't disagree. He walked toward Ethan first, placing a steady hand on his son's shoulder. And yes, his son. After years of legal battles, testimonies, reform campaigns, and relentless building of a safer world for Ethan, Robert had finally become his official father in every sense of the word. Ethan had taken the last name Sinclair on his 15th birthday. "Everything okay?" Ethan asked. Robert nodded. "Better than okay." He glanced at Vivian, who looked back at him with that quiet, knowing smile he had fallen for 7 years ago. 7 years of fights, reconciliations, fear, triumph, passion, and soft domestic moments that no magazine would ever understand. 7 years of choosing each other. Robert sat beside Vivian, and she nestled against him as though the universe had shaped their bodies to fit this way. Emma immediately dropped her paintbrush and ran to him. "Daddy!" Robert scooped her up effortlessly, even as blue paint smeared across his shirt. "Emma Sinclair," he said dramatically, "you are ruining all my clothes." Emma pressed her forehead against his chin, giggling. "I'm making them better." Vivian laughed, shaking her head. "She gets her artistic flair from Ethan." "Hey!" Ethan protested, though he was smiling. "I don't finger paint people." Robert kissed the top of Emma's head, inhaling the warm scent of sun and childhood. For a moment, his eyes drifted toward the horizon, the very place where he had once looked for escape. He no longer needed one. Vivian placed a hand on his knee, her thumb brushing gently in that familiar, soothing pattern. "You were quiet during dinner." Robert looked at her, eyes softened by years of love. "Just thinking." "About what?" He glanced at their children, then back at her. "How lucky I am." Her breath caught, even after all these years. "Robert," he leaned in, kissing her brow with reverence. "7 years, Vivian, and I still can't believe this is my life." She smiled, her voice soft. "You built this life. You fought for it." He shook his head. "We built it. You fought with me." Vivian rested her head on his shoulder. "Always." Ethan joined them on the terrace steps, dropping down beside them. Robert placed a hand on the boy's back. "You did well today," Robert said. Ethan shrugged. "It was just a speech." "It was your first speech as youth ambassador," Robert corrected, "and you spoke from your heart. You made me proud." Ethan looked embarrassed but pleased. "Thanks, Dad." Dad. 7 years later, that word still softened Robert's entire expression. The Sinclair Foundation had grown into a national force for children displaced by the system. Ethan had become its face, a voice for kids who had none. Reporters no longer hunted him. Instead, they listened to him. The scandal that had once threatened to destroy Robert's life had instead forced an entire industry to reform its practices. Privacy laws had tightened. Media boundaries had been redrawn. Camilla Vale. Vivian felt the shift in her husband's posture at the thought. Camilla had lost everything. Her consulting firm collapsed after the investigation revealed the illegal surveillance links. Several board members who sided with her had been forced to resign. She avoided prison through a plea deal, but she lost all power, all influence. The price she paid was not financial. It was relevance. Robert had not spoken to her since. Vivian gently touched his arm. "She doesn't matter anymore." Robert nodded slowly. "I know. I just can't believe how far we've come." Ethan leaned back on his palms, watching the water shimmer. "Do you ever think about it?" "About what?" Robert asked. "How life would have been if that night never happened." Vivian smiled sadly. "Which night?" Ethan shrugged. "The night the pictures leaked. The night everything blew up. The night you two fell in love." Robert and Vivian shared a look, one full of affection, nostalgia, and the gentle ache of remembering a version of themselves who still felt unworthy of the peace they now lived. Robert answered softly, "If that night never happened, I wouldn't have my son." Ethan blushed slightly, smiling down at the tiles. Vivian added, "And we wouldn't have Emma." Emma giggled loudly, splashing paint onto Robert's leg. "I'm special." "You are," Robert agreed, kissing her cheek. "And," Vivian whispered, intertwining her fingers with his, "you wouldn't have learned how brave your heart could be." Robert looked at her with so much love, it softened the sunset itself. Ethan stood suddenly. "I'm getting dessert. Want some?" Vivian laughed. "Only if you bring enough for everyone." "I always do," Ethan said, growing more responsible every day. Emma squirmed out of Robert's arms to follow him. "I want cake!" They ran inside, leaving Robert and Vivian alone in the golden light of dusk. For a long moment, neither spoke. They simply breathed together, listening to the waves they had once feared would drown them. "Do you ever regret it?" Robert asked quietly. Vivian lifted her face to his. "What?" "Choosing my chaos." Vivian smiled, the kind of smile a woman could only wear after years of loving the same man fiercely, fearlessly. She placed her palm against his jaw. "You were never chaos," she whispered. "You were the place I finally felt seen." Robert closed his eyes, leaning into her touch. "I love you." Even after years of hearing it, the words never lost their weight. Vivian kissed him softly, a whisper of lips full of promise. "I love you more than I did back then." He smiled. "Impossible." She laughed softly. "Absolutely true." From inside, the sound of Ethan calling Emma made them both chuckle. Robert folded Vivian into his arms, holding her the way he had always wanted to 7 years ago, without fear, without hesitation, without walls. As the sun dipped below the ocean, wrapping the terrace in shades of gold and memory, Vivian whispered into his chest, "We made it, Robert." He kissed her hair. "No," he said softly, "we're still making it." And with the laughter of their children spilling into the night and the warmth of love steady in their hearts, they knew the world could change 1,000 times. But some loves were built to last beyond the storms, beyond the noise, beyond the years. This was one of them. In the end, Robert and Vivian's journey reminds us of something powerful. Love doesn't need perfect conditions to bloom. It grows in the middle of storms, in the cracks left by fear, and in the spaces where we dare to be honest. Their story teaches us that choosing love is not the absence of difficulty. It is the decision to stand together despite it. It is courage wrapped in tenderness, persistence guided by hope, and the quiet belief that hearts can heal when they finally feel seen. Ethan's transformation shows us that one act of protection can change a life. That when we fight for someone, truly fight, we build futures that once seemed impossible. And Emma's laughter in the epilogue reminds us of what love can create when it is nurtured with truth and patience. If this story touched your heart, I'd love to know your thoughts. What moment moved you the most? What lesson stays with you tonight? And for those who reach the very end, write the word ocean in the comments. It's a symbol in this story of fear, of reflection, and ultimately of peace. Seeing it will help me know who walked every step with Robert, Vivian, and Ethan. If you wish to support the team that pours countless hours into bringing these emotional journeys to life, you can leave a super thanks with any amount that feels right for you. Your kindness helps keep these stories alive, and if a contribution isn't possible right now, simply sharing this video with someone who loves heartfelt romances is already a beautiful way to help. Thank you for being here, for listening with your heart, and for keeping these stories alive. When you're ready for another emotional journey, check out the other narrations waiting for you in the cards.